Good morning, everyone. Is my audio working okay?
All right. Just let everybody else into the Zoom so we can go ahead and get started.
All right, so I'm gonna have to read from here. Good morning. I would like to call the Monday, February 7th Board of Zoning Adjustments meeting to order. We will begin with roll call. Candace Forrest.
Present.
Todd James.
Present.
Samara Aggins.
Present.
Jose Alvarez.
Present.
Jamie Romero Diaz.
Present.
Alfonso Gonzalez. Absent. And Matt
Present.
Okay. At this time, would the board make a motion to adopt the minutes from the January 10th meeting?
I, Todd James, so move.
Alvarez seconds.
It's been moved by Commissioner James, second by Commissioner Alvarez to adopt the minutes from our last meeting. Roll call vote. Todd James.
Yes.
Tamara Eggins.
Yes.
Jose Alvarez.
Yes.
Ramiro Diaz.
Yes.
Alfonso Gonzalez. I didn't hear you, Alfonso.
Yay.
Matthew Rufo
Yes.
and Candace Forrest, yes. 7 yeas, no nays, the motion carries.
You. And would the chair please read the special hearing rules for adoption?
Yes, special public hearing rules for Board of Zoning Adjustments hearings held via video conference. Order of business. The order of business at the hearing shall be as follows. Call to order and roll call with recording of members present. Approval of minutes, reading and adoption of the hearing rules, presentation of dockets, which includes staff presentation, applicant presentation, and questions from members. Recess for 30 minutes, consideration of dockets, which includes public comment, rebuttal by applicant, questions from members, and voting, ending with adjournment. Presentation of dockets. The order of business for each docket shall be as follows. Presentation by the City Planning Commission staff or the Department of Safety and Permit staff. Presentation by the applicant or their representative. The appellant or applicant may appear on their behalf or be represented by a duly authorized agent. Only one representative may speak on behalf of a request and must pre-register with the staff of the City Planning Commission. Other representatives or speakers may sign up to provide comments during the public comment portion of the meeting. The applicant shall be allowed a maximum of 5 minutes. Questions from members. The members have an opportunity to ask questions of the staff or applicant. The board shall take a recess. The board shall take a 30-minute recess to allow members of the public to submit comments. Public comment. Rules. Only written public comment will be allowed. Live public comment will not be allowed. No member of the public may submit more than one written comment per agenda item. Time allowed for public comment. The public comment form will be made available at the start of the meeting and will close at the end of the 30-minute recess. Form. Public comments must be submitted electronically on the form provided by the City Planning Commission. Any comment missing this information will not be read aloud. Each submission must contain the commenter's first and last name, the commenter's address, whether the commenter is being paid in connection with his or her comments, and the agenda item. Reading of public comments. A moderator will read into the record all comments pertaining to that item that have been submitted in accordance with these rules. Comments will be read aloud in a normal speaking voice. The moderator will discontinue reading a comment once it exceeds 2 minutes. Rebuttal by applicant. Following the public comment period, if there is opposition, the authorized representative of the application is allowed a rebuttal not to exceed 5 minutes. Questions from members. Following the public comment and rebuttal, the members have an opportunity to ask questions of the staff or applicant. Voting. Making a motion. The member making a motion shall clearly state their name when making a motion. For example, I, Candace Forrest, move to approve or deny the request. Seconding a motion. The member seconding a motion shall clearly state their name when seconding the motion. For example, I, Candace Forrest, second the motion made by the other member. Statement by chair. The chair will restate the motion, confirming who made and seconded the motion. Voting. The chair will request a verbal vote from each member by roll call. Each member will indicate yea to vote in support of the motion or nay to vote in opposition. This concludes the special rules.
Thank you so much. Would the board make a motion to adopt the special hearing rules?
I, Todd James, so move.
Alvarez seconds.
It's been moved by Commissioner James, second by Commissioner Alvarez to adopt the special public hearing rules. Roll call vote, Todd James,
Yes.
Tamara Eggins,
Yes.
Jose Alvarez,
Yes.
Ramiro Diaz,
Yes.
Alfonso Gonzalez,
Yay.
Matthew Rufo,
Yes.
and Candace Forrest, yes. 7 yeas, no nays, the motion carries.
Thank you. In accordance with the adopted hearing rules, the public comment form link is available on the city's Granicus website, as well as nola.gov/CPC. It will be available until the end of the recess, after which public comments will be read into record as a part of the consideration of dockets. As a reminder to applicants, action that the board takes today will be released in the form of a disposition notice by February 17th and sent via email and mail to the applicant, as well as posted on the One Stop app for other interested parties. Requests that the board votes to approve must show compliance with any noted provisos before the case is finalized and granted final approval. Item number 2, BZA 06721, has been withdrawn by the applicant, and we will begin with unfinished business for variances. The first item is BZA docket 078-21 for the property at 10-100 Morrison Road. Lynette Gordon is signed up to speak on behalf of this application, and following the staff's presentation, the applicant will have 5 minutes to present. Aspen.
BZA docket 7821 is a request for variances from the provisions of Article 14, Section 14.3A1, Table 14.2, Article 14, Section 14.3.A.2, Article 14, Section 14.3.B.1, and Article 18, Section 18.16.B.3 of the Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance to permit the construction of a daycare with excessive front yard setback, a primary entrance not oriented to the street, insufficient ground floor transparency on the primary street, insufficient ceiling height, and parking as a predominant visual element. The applicants went to the November BZA hearing and January hearing and received deferrals to explore alternative design proposals to comply with the CZO. The applicants are now proposing a small administrative building in the front of the site that would meet with building design standards as well as the front yard setbacks. As the applicants are still making design changes and are awaiting DAC comments, staff is recommending another 60-day deferral to ensure the plans will meet the CZO regulations with the intent of withdrawing the application.
Is that the end of your presentation, Aspen?
Jesus.
Lynette Gordon, you have 5 minutes to present. Is she on?
I don't see the applicant on.
Okay. Let's hand it over to the board then.
Are there any questions or comments? I mean, I don't know, with the applicant not being on, I don't know if there's any questions to direct to staff. Seeing none, we can go to the next item.
Okay. All right, we will move on to BZA docket 00422 for the property at 9301 River Road. Charles McKay Jr. is signed up to speak on behalf of this application, and following the staff presentation, the applicant will have 5 minutes to present. Emily.
Thank you. The next item
is BZA docket 00422. This request is for a variance from the provisions of Article 8, Section 8.3, Table 8-2, to permit the construction of a single-family residence with excessive building height. In the RRE, Rural Residential Estate District, the maximum permitted building height is 35 feet. The applicant proposes a single-family residence, 40 feet, 3 3/16 inches in height, and is requesting a waiver of 5 feet, 3 3/16 inches. The staff believes that the requested variance fails to meet standards 1, 2, 4, and 6 of the standards for variances of Article 4, Section 46F of the Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance, in that 1, there are no special circumstances peculiar to the land. 2, literal interpretation of the ordinance will not deprive the applicant of commonly enjoyed rights. Number 4, the variance will confer on the applicant special privileges, and standard 6, the property regulations will not result in a demonstrable hardship. Therefore, the staff recommends denial of the requested variance. And it also does not appear that the applicant's agent is on the call at this time.
Okay, are there any questions? Again, without the applicant on, I guess, are there any questions to staff on this item? Seeing none, we can go to the next item.
Okay, the next item is BZA docket 00522 for the property at 1510 through 1512 Mary Street. Nicholas Shatterfield is signed up to speak on behalf of this application, and following the staff presentation, the applicant will have 5 minutes to present. Brendan?
This item is BZA docket 00522 for a single family residence located at 1512 Murray Street. The property is in the HMR3 zoning district and has been deemed in danger of imminent collapse by the Historic District's Landmark Commission. The applicant proposes to demolish the structure while retaining the facade. Because of the demolition, the property will need waivers for rear and side setbacks, as well as the open space ratio requirements of Article 9, Section 9.3a. Let's see. They are requesting a waiver of 14% for the open space ratio, as well as a setback waiver of 3 feet on the St. Bernard Avenue yard side and 1 feet 5/8 of an inch on the Columbus Street yard side. They are also requesting a waiver of 16 feet and 2 inches on the rear yard setback. The staff believes this request does satisfy the 9 criteria as they pertain to the requested variance, and therefore recommends approval for requested variance.
Are you gonna tee them up, Valerie, or for the applicant to speak?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. I apologize. Mr. Shatterfield, it looks like he's on the call. Okay, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't have much to add. We read the staff report. We agree with it. The only thing I will add is, the sole intention of this project from the onset was to restore and rehab this existing historic structure. It was only through the design and engineering process where we sort of realized that the building had been open to the elements for so long that it was sort of beyond repair. And so our intention is really to just rebuild within the existing footprint. The only sort of additional bulk that we're adding is a small camelback on the rear of the lot. The site constraints here are extremely tight. I think the widest point in the lot is a little over 12 feet, and it tapers to less than 3 feet in the back of the lot. So there's a lot of constraints that we're dealing with, but again, I want to just reiterate, our sole intention when we took this project on at the beginning was to just restore the building. It was only through the engineering process that we realized a lot of it had to come down and get rebuilt. So we agree with the staff's recommendation. We're happy to work with the staff and HDLC moving forward to make sure that the new build meets all guidelines set forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Satterfield. Are there any questions from the board? Seeing none, we can go to the next item.
Okay. Thank you. The next item is BZA docket 006-22 for the property at 1717 Canal Street. We have Michael Sherman signed up to speak on behalf of this application, and following the staff presentation, the applicant will have 5 minutes to present. BZA docket 006-22 is for variances from the provisions of Article 15, Section 15.3.A.1, Table 15-2, to permit the construction of a mixed-use development, retail, multifamily residence with insufficient lot area and insufficient permeable open space. The applicant is proposing to develop an 85-foot, 6-story mixed-use facility that will consist of ground floor retail, 212 apartments, and 247 off-street vehicle parking spaces. The Board of Zoning Adjustments has heard this case previously in 2017, BZA docket 008-17. However, the variances expired, and therefore the applicant is required to reapply for the waivers that were previously sought. The required density in the MU1 district is 1,000 square feet of lot area per dwelling unit. The applicant is proposing 287 square feet per dwelling unit and seeking a waiver of 713 square feet per dwelling unit. Once developed, 20% of the lot is required to be permeable open space. The applicant is proposing 0% and seeking a waiver of 20%. The staff would like to point out that the property is now located within an MIZ, mandatory inclusionary zoning subdistrict, which was adopted in 2019. The MIZ was created to provide for a full range of housing choices for households of all incomes and applies to all developments, including new construction, substantial improvement, expansion, mixed-use projects, or a change in use that contains 10 or more multifamily residential dwelling units. That is, multifamily dwellings, established multifamily dwellings, and dwellings above the ground floor. To ensure compliance with the Affordable Housing Development Guidelines found in Article 28, Section 28.3, and the Affordable Housing Development Design Standards found in Article 28, Section 28.4, the staff recommends approval of the requested variances subject to 5 provisos, one of which includes compliance with the MIZ regulations of Article 28. Mr. Sherman, you have 5 minutes to present.
Thank you, members of the board. Thank you, staff. First, on behalf of the project, we'd like to thank staff for the recommendation of approval. This is the identical variance that the Board of Zoning Adjustments approved in 2017. There were 3 delays on this project. Using a HUD loan, it required a cultural resource investigation, followed by a sound study, and then the HUD loan process got slowed through COVID. The variance lapsed. So even though we're applying anew, it is in fact the same project the BZA approved in 2017. We'd respectfully ask the BZA to approve it again today and thank staff for the recommendation of support. It's 212 much needed housing units downtown. The project has not changed. It's still across from the hospital, still on the Canal Street car line, and still in an area kind of full of surface parking lots and vacant and blighted structures in the vicinity. So a welcome project. It is a market rate project, although it actually meets a pretty significant demand for workforce housing units. I do want to provide one clarification on the MIZ proviso. We've had a lot of discussion with staff. The MIZ rules allow for any project which had complete plans submitted, 60% plans prior to July 1st of last year, to vest prior to the impact of MIZ. It's our belief, since we had 100% plans submitted, that this project did vest prior to July 1st. That decision has not been made by Safety and Permits. So we do have to make an application to Safety and Permits. I did inquire with staff to see if that proviso in any way superseded the determination that Safety and Permits has yet to make, hopefully later this month. And I'm confident, based upon the email exchange with staff, that the proviso as written does not impact the determination that Safety and Permits will make. So while this is a market rate project, while it does meet workforce housing AMI, it does not comply with MIZ, and I want to make sure the record's clear that this is not an MIZ project. That would force it back to ground zero and invalidate the HUD loan. So we ask you for your support, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Just a quick question based on that last comment from Mr. Sherman. Quick question to staff on that last proviso. In the event that there's a later decision that determines that it isn't applicable, how do we handle this particular proviso? Do we need to add some additional language to it, or I just don't know how we should proceed with that particular one?
So I can respond to that, and I apologize. My camera is not working today.
Oh, you're fine.
So the conversation I had with Mike is that the language of the proviso basically states that they have to demonstrate compliance with that provision. If the provision is not applicable, then they are compliant with the provision.
Okay.
As submitted.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from board members?
Okay. I guess it's just to try to make sure that we have that covered in some capacity. I don't know if we would need to amend the language on that last proviso to just reflect what Bob just provided to us in comment. Is that necessary, Missy, or?
I don't think it's necessary because it's a contingent condition, but if you want to add it just to belt and suspenders it, that's totally fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I was thinking of mentioning maybe as applicable for that last one, if that,
yeah,
that
or,
motion,
it is, you can even add in like, contingent on safety and permits determination, you can add something like that.
Okay.
And just for everybody else, just understand the sensitivity around that, considering with any type of HUD application, those projects could take 24 and even beyond that, as much as 30 and 36 months to get approved, which exceeds far beyond what we would usually have as our window of time where a project could be approved and then held until it could be finalized for permitting. So just, I understand the position what the applicant is presenting.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Sherman.
Thank you, board members.
All right, next item.
Yeah, so the next item is item number 6, BZA docket 007-22 for the property at 917 through 919 8th Street. This is an appeal of the decision of the Director of the Department of Safety and Permits regarding the determination that the property has not attained legal non-conforming status for a 5-unit multifamily development. Lauren Griffin is signed up to speak on behalf of this application, and following the safety and permits staff presentation, you will have 5 minutes to present. Safety and permits.
Good morning. My name is Nick Kimball. I'm the zoning administrator with the Department of Safety and Permits. So this is BZA docket 007-22 relative to 917, 919 8th Street. The applicant's appeal alleges an error in the decision of the Director of the Department of Safety and Permits regarding the determination that the property has not attained legal non-conforming status for a 5-unit multifamily development. The subject of this appeal is the denial of a non-conforming use determination for a 5-unit multifamily dwelling in an H2 RD2 district at 917 919 8th Street on November 2nd, 2021. The documents submitted by the current and former property owners state that the structure was originally a raised 2-family dwelling. In the 1980s, the garage on the ground floor was converted to 2 additional dwelling units for a total of 4 units. In 2005 or 2006, the former owner built an addition to the back of the structure that created a 5th dwelling unit. The owner constructed this addition without any building permits. To support this request, the applicant has submitted a written description of the history of the property from the current and former property owners. The applicant provided energy bills for the 2 accounts at this property In addition, the applicant submitted pictometry images from September 7th, 2005 and March 17th, 2007, showing the rear addition was constructed between that time. A multifamily dwelling is a prohibited use in the HU RD2 two-family residential district and the former RD3 residential district. To establish a multifamily dwelling or to expand an existing multifamily dwelling would be considered a use violation. In accordance with the prescription regulations in Louisiana Revised Statute 95625 and Zoning Interpretation Memo Z2103, the city has 10 years from the date the city receives written notification of a use violation to bring enforcement action on the property. Therefore, the property would have to prove that the city received written notice of these violations for at least 10 years without taking any enforcement action. The recent permit records for the subject property are limited, with only 2 electrical permits in 2009, where the existing use for on the application form said DFD. There are only 2 addresses and only 2 electricity accounts at the subject property. There have been numerous zoning enforcement actions taken against the property. There have been judgments rendered against this property, finding it was an illegal use on April 23rd, 2014, January 1st, 2016, and September 11th, 2019. Based on this information, it's clear that the addition of the structure and creation of the 5th dwelling unit around 2006 has not met the requirements for the 10-year prescription period as it was cited in 2014, 2016, and 2019. It is less clear if the 3rd and 4th units that were allegedly built in the 1980s have met the prescription requirements. However, the applicant has not yet submitted sufficient documentation to verify that is the case. All of the city records indicate that the structure is a 2-family dwelling, and the only evidence provided are the letters stating that the structure was converted to a 4-plex in the 1980s. Per CZO section 25.3B3, the burden is on the property owner to provide clear and convincing evidence that the non-conforming use has been maintained, which is not the case, or has not been done in this case. For the reasons stated in this report, the department's decision should be upheld.
Thank you. Ms. Griffin, you have 5 minutes to present.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me on. So this is a request for a legal non-conforming use of a multi-unit that existed for decades, at least the 1980s, as attested to by the current owner and the prior owner, who has zero benefit to this appeal. He gets nothing out of it, so you can take that as true for what it's worth. Moreover, the Department of Zoning and the staff both believe that this has been in existence for well over 10 years. In the 80s, the 4th unit was added. We have pictures that show that it was added since at least 2007 and 2005. And in 2006, we know, at least 2006, that the 5th unit was added. It's clear that it has been more than 4 units for many years. The staff's report says it. They have no reason to believe that's not true. And zoning believes it's been multiple units for decades. It wasn't until 2011 that a violation was brought. It was never adjudicated. There's no, I can't find any judgments in the record. So while violations may have been sent, there's no action. There's been zero action for 10 years of the city knowing of these violations. The LA 9:5625, the prescriptive period within which to bring an action to enforce a zoning restriction or regulation or violation thereof shall be 10 years from the first act constituting the commission of the violation. Well, for the 4 units, we know that was at least 1980. For the 5th unit, we know it was 2006 at the latest. Clearly, that did not occur for the 4th unit. And while we think this was an incorrect violation brought in 2011, for a 5th unit, there's been no adjudication on it. And that's well over 10 years and zero action has been taken. The evidence presented shows that it's been this way since the 1980s and that 5 units should be allowed, at the very least 4 units, but it should no way be deemed 2 units because it's been done for well over 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from board members? Just a quick question to staff. In looking at the report, I know the applicant is indicating that the units were there since the 1980s, but I don't see in the report that staff submitted that there was an acknowledgement that the units were there since the 1980s. It references the 10-year period, which would bring it to sometime during the period where all of the violations were noticed. So I'm just trying to get clarification on at what point does the city recognize that these units were there?
So yeah, I think there's a couple of issues on here because this has expanded twice, once apparently in the 80s and then again around 2006. So I don't think as of yet we have sufficient evidence that the 3rd and 4th units have prescribed under Louisiana state law. If they were there since the 80s, we could probably get some additional information, but so far the only information we have is like unnotarized letters from the property owner saying that they think they're there. So I'm guessing if we got some additional information from the property owner,
I was just trying to make clear, because from my reading of the report, I wasn't seeing where the city was acknowledging the units were there since the 80s. And that's what the applicant was mentioning in their comments. So that's what I was just trying to, I didn't read that into what was written. So that's why I'm just trying to get clear on what time frame we're speaking of, because all of the violations look to be like 2016, 2017. If you go back 10 years from now, you're looking at 2011, 2012. And so that's not the 80s. So that's why I just wanted to get clear on the appropriate time frame, because what the report says is that the 10-year period was interrupted by the violations, and all of the violations listed were 16, 17, and 19.
Right. And so I don't think we have sufficient evidence as of yet to verify that the 3rd and 4th unit expansion in the 1980s has prescribed. I think we can probably get there. We would just need additional information from the applicant, and they could, submit an amendment to their initial non-conforming use determination with additional information, and we would reconsider that. I think it's clear that the addition in 2005, 2006 is not prescribed, because we have cited it, and the statement that there has not been any sort of adjudication hearings on it's incorrect. I included, the 3 judgments from 2014, 2016, and 2019 in the packet, so we can see that, the judgments are there and they're available for you all to see as well.
And then even the documentation that was submitted from Entergy only showed 2 meters. It didn't show any more than the 2 meters.
Yes, that is correct.
So, Mr. Kendall, you referenced in 2006 and 2007 from there's some type of acknowledgement to modifications on the property, and that's well beyond the 2011 window of time. So if I understand correctly, this just requires a little bit further coordination with the applicant to fortify their documentation, because you mentioned it wasn't notarized. And so I'm kind of reading, the way I'm interpreting some of the comments is that this just requires further coordination with them beforehand, before the department's position change.
So yeah, I think the applicant can submit additional information and probably potentially get a determination that they have 3 or 4 legal units here. I think it's fairly clear from the evidence and the violations and the citation that there's no way that this has 5 legal dwelling units.
Okay.
Can I say anything? Or do I need to wait till the next?
If you want to provide something, that's fine.
There's nothing indicating that I need to provide a notarized document. I don't see any rules on that. As you just said, Nick, the evidence is clear. It's been there since 1980s. I don't know why I would need to provide anything more for a four unit if that's what's agreed upon. I just don't understand if it's all there now.
Well, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, the only real evidence we have that it's 4 units is just a letter from the prior owner, and we do require notarized documents. It's on the application form. It's on the memorandum we have regarding non-conforming use determinations. I also believe it's in the CVO.
Yeah.
And so just having a notarized affidavit is, I think, like the minimum. I think we would also want to see additional information that there are 4 units there, such as floor plans and pictures and other information as well. So I think it's possible to get to 4 units. We don't have that documentation as of yet.
Yeah, and I was just going to weigh in that based on the information that's provided at this point, it is not clear that there were 4 units prior to going back to the 1980s. So that's why I asked the questions that I asked, because there isn't sufficient documentation to make that determination at this point.
And if Nick is giving you some direction on how to help reinforce this, he's trying to at least help get you there. So just because you may have not seen it doesn't mean that there's not a process or a way to get there.
Okay, thanks.
Just based on the comments, Mr. Kendall, are you seeking a deferral to get additional information before a final determination is made, or what is the position of the department at this point?
I think no matter what happens at this meeting, we would consider a new application with additional information. So whether this gets deferred or if the department's decision's upheld, either way, we would work with the property owner on getting additional information for the 3rd and 4th unit. So yeah, I think it's at the pleasure of the board, I guess I'll say.
Okay.
I would just mention to the applicant, I mean, it sounds like there's at least some path forward. If I would recommend a deferral for you, so that you continue to work with them instead of starting a new app. I understand you could start a new application. That would only get you to the 3rd and 4th unit. Sounds like the 5th is really the question, and getting up to 5 is the question at hand right now. Just work with them to see if there's any way to demonstrate cause to support your claim.
Okay, so we could defer now and amend rather than submit a whole new one since we already paid for it and started it.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I just always get confused with these types of processes because it's a question of what information was in front of the department when they made their decision. And so that's where I get hung up on us making a decision on whether or not there was an error. And once we defer and are bringing in new information, is that really a new determination? Or, that's the only thing that's just a little funky for me. I don't know if there's anything to clarify on your part, Missy.
Well, I think that what she was just saying is that they already paid for this application, and it's kind of the same, they're asking for 5, but then they might amend it down to 4 and there might be a different result. So I think,
Okay.
it's all in the same scope. It's just a factual difference.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions from the board? Seeing none, we can go. Oh, I guess we can clarify it at the point that we're making a decision, but I was just trying to figure out if 30 days would be sufficient from the applicant to coordinate with the department to get the additional information.
Yes.
Okay, because we do have a timeline. You may want to just make sure that you'll be within the timeline to submit information. So you may just want to communicate with staff once we break for public comment, because I just don't want you to be in a situation where you may not meet our deadlines to get the additional documentation in.
Yeah, and I will say in this case, because this would require an amended report, like the department would need some time to review the additional documents submitted, write a new report. And so even if they're able to get documentation in a couple of weeks, it might not be enough time to have a complete determination by the March meeting.
Okay, and bearing in mind that probably the Mardi Gras break as well. But we can, I would just say confer with staff, Ms. Griffin, just to be sure, and we can figure that out as we're getting to the later part of the meeting.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. All right, next item.
The next item is BZA docket 008-22 for the property at 2043 Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard. This is an appeal of the decision of the director of the Department of Safety and Permits regarding the determination that short-term rentals must be developed under residential zoning guidelines. We have Zach Smith signed up to speak on behalf of the application, and following the safety and permits staff presentation, you will have 5 minutes to present. Safety and permits.
Okay, relative to 2043 Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard, the applicant's appeal alleges an error in the decision of the Director of the Department of Safety and Permits regarding the determination that commercial short-term rentals are subject to the residential zoning guidelines. The applicant is proposing a 4-unit townhouse development at 2043 Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard, which is located in a HUMU mixed-use district. One of the proposed units is a commercial short-term rental. Applicant has applied for a design review application with the City Planning Commission. During the review of this project, the Department of Safety and Permits was asked if the development would be subject to the residential or mixed-use requirements, since one of the 4 dwelling units is a commercial short-term rental. Department of Safety and Permits made the determination that the development would be subject to the residential townhouse zoning requirements. This determination was made for a number of reasons. First, by definition, a short-term rental, even a commercial short-term rental, is required to be in a dwelling unit. And a dwelling unit is a residential use. The commercial short-term rental use is listed under the commercial use section of the use table, which is table 12-1. However, a dwelling unit is a residential use. In addition, the short-term rental use standards state that short-term rental shall be considered dwelling units for density purposes and subject to the minimum lot area per dwelling unit requirements of the applicable zoning district. When there is a conflict in the regulations, CZO section 1.4.g states that the most restriction regulation applies, which in this case, the residential setbacks are more restrictive. Second, commercial and mixed-use structures don't just have different setback and bulk and yard regulations. There are different design standards that apply to commercial uses. If a commercial short-term rental was considered a commercial use, it would also be required to provide a minimum 50% transparency on the primary street and would require a minimum first floor height of 12 feet. These standards, while appropriate for commercial uses, would not necessarily be appropriate for a commercial short-term rental, which is residential in their design. Furthermore, the plan submitted for design review 104-21 for the proposed development did not appear to comply with either of these regulations. Third, most dwelling units that receive commercial short-term rental licenses do not apply for building permits specifically as a commercial short-term rental. They are an existing dwelling unit or were developed or renovated as a residential dwelling and then seek a commercial short-term rental license. If the department has to apply the commercial zoning standards to all commercial short-term rentals, even every new commercial short-term rental license would have to be available for compliance with all commercial use zoning requirements, and any structure that does not comply with the 12 feet first floor requirement would require a variance. This could create a burden on short-term rental applicants, Department of Safety and Permit staff, and the BZA. The fourth issue is kind of the converse of the third issue. If commercial short-term rentals are considered commercial for the zoning regulations and do not comply with the residential setbacks, That would create a potential loophole in the zoning ordinance. Developers could claim to provide commercial short-term rentals to reduce their setbacks and then never apply for a commercial short-term rental license to take advantage of the reduced setbacks. Even if a developer was acting in good faith and received a commercial short-term rental license, this would cause a problem if the commercial short-term rental unit was converted back to a long-term residential dwelling. To resolve these issues, it would require an after-the-fact variance or major structural modifications to remove a portion of the building that's located in the residential setback. It is true that the Department of Safety and Permits position has been to consider commercial short-term rentals a commercial use in regards to the off-street parking requirement and parking exemption. However, the parking requirements tend to have much more flexibility to achieve compliance if there is a change in the use than a setback requirement, which would require major structural modifications. Finally, from a common sense perspective, it would not be consistent that two residential structures that are similarly situated and exactly the same would have different setback and building design standards because one structure included a commercial short-term rental unit with its building permit and the other structure received a building permit only with long-term residential use. In summary, a commercial short-term rental is a license type in a residential dwelling unit. Therefore, the structure should be subject to the residential building requirements and not the commercial building requirements. If the commercial building requirements are applied, it would create multiple issues in having to apply inappropriate design guidelines, penalizing existing dwelling units that were not specifically permitted as commercial short-term rentals, potentially requiring a large number of variances, and would create a potential loophole for residential structures to be developed with commercial structure setback requirements. For the reasons stated in this report, department's decision should be upheld.
Thank you. Zach Smith, you now have 5 minutes to present.
Thank you so much, Valerie, and good morning, board members. It's been a while. It's a pleasure to see you guys again. Today, it's a very easy one we have, and it really bases on following the actual words in the CZO. There's a lot of intended, potentials, possibles that kind of get thought about, but we have to focus on the matter at hand and we have to focus on the words on the page. So because for that, we're going to spell out why this is a very easy one. I have a strong feeling there's going to be a lot of questions potentially about this because of the kind of heightened technical nature of this. So as always, we as members of the public, we won't speak unless being asked later to do so. So please call on me at will. To kind of start, table 12.1 specific to this HUMU is clear. The commercial short-term rental, and I'm going to kind of stress the word commercial because it's really important to the case here. The commercial short-term rental is a commercial use. It was intentionally moved in 2019 after much debate, after much public input, and after a series of city council meetings. It was actually moved from a residential use in the use table to a commercial use in the use table. Right there on its face, we probably could end this conversation because of just how plain and simple it is. But of course, we want to make sure that we have a well-rounded defense here. It's understandable that there's discrepancies in some of these terms because for folks that have been around for a while, the commercial short-term rental use used to be in a different portion of the table. So there's a lot of these things where the word residential will creep in or be added inadvertently. And I bring that back up because commercial is the only word that continues to appear throughout this, whereas the word residential kind of keeps getting misadded to terms, specifically like dwelling unit. We keep calling out residential dwelling unit. The standards, the law, the definition of dwelling unit, the word residential does not appear. In commercial short-term rental, the word appears. In the commercial use table, the word commercial appears. Again, dwelling unit is not identified in Article 26 as a residential use. It continues to be added into arguments, but it is not. We bring out the fact that if we were to take the same argument and put it into the C2, it's in your packets, specifically in the C2 zoning district, it effectively means that this sort of interpretation from the city would mean that even though a commercial short-term rental is a permitted use by the use table, specifically put there by the city council after extreme amounts of debate in 2019, it means that with this logic, we'd effectively get to a non-permitted use, because if you go to the C2 bulk and area tables, we don't actually have any, specific requirements about residential uses. Imagine if this was a bar, same sort of argument. Bars get licenses eventually. We require applicants to identify, every applicant needs to identify what their intended use is. Whether somebody may or possibly in the future do something, we have to go based on what is presented. We have presented a commercial use as part of this mixed use building, and we keep getting pushback with, unfortunately, the what ifs. I understand the position that the city is in, but unfortunately, that's not what we're here to look at. We look at the potential burdens for future applicants, et cetera. What about the burden for this particular applicant who's clearly identified a commercial use?
You've reached the end of your time.
That was 5 minutes?
Yes.
All right, we have 4 minutes on ours. I apologize. Okay, if that's where we are, again, I certainly could answer some questions.
I'm sorry, was anyone else? I believe that is the end of the time, unless someone else was looking at the time. Based on what I'm looking at here, we're at 5 minutes.
Okay. At the end of the day, the points are clear. So, commercial is commercial. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are there any questions or comments from board members?
I'm sure we'll probably have more dialogue after the comment section anyway.
Okay. All right, seeing none, next item.
Okay, this concludes the presentation of dockets. The board will now recess until 11:30 a.m. Consideration of dockets, including public comments, will begin at 11:30 a.m.
Really quickly, sorry. We do have one of the applicants on who was not here earlier during their item. Is this something that we want to take up now, or do you want to wait?
Which item was it?
It is for, I believe it's item number 4. It's the River Road item.
Okay. Madam Chair, if it's not out of order, to just maybe hear it back out of order, just to allow that applicant time to provide their comment, or is it just better suited for us? Well, I know we're going to want to have some level, there may be public comment, and I'm sure that at least the applicant needs to speak ahead of that.
Yeah, that's fine. I believe it's item 3, Emily, just to be sure. Right. But yeah, that's fine.
So, Madam Chair,
a motion to hear this item out of order, Missy.
We already heard it, so we can just invite the applicant to make their comments. It's fine.
Okay. Is the applicant on? Valerie, do you want to bring them in?
Yes, and just Shannon Smiley is here.
Yes.
Presenting this item. So Shannon, you have 5 minutes to present.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, can everyone? Okay, my name's Shannon. I'm sorry. I'm not greatly prepared. My engineer was going to present for me, but he had a family emergency. So the only thing I just wanted to say, because the report was very thorough, I just wanted to say that we are, that we would come down on height with the garage. So meaning that we would only need 3 feet and I think 3/16 inches of a waiver instead of the 5 feet and 3 3/16 inches. Because right now we have the garage height at 10 feet. And, due with the NAVD and the flood elevation, we can come down to 8 feet for that. I just wanted to put that out there. I'm not sure if that's going to make a difference or anything. I'm not greatly prepared due to the engineer was going to be here, but he had a family emergency. So I work at a hospital. I just came on real quick to at least say that.
Is that the end of your comments,
Any
Ms.
questions?
Smiley?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much.
Are there any questions from the board members for Ms. Smiley?
I might ask for clarification later because since this height issue keeps popping up and based off of BFE requirements, I'll just wait till after public comment.
Okay. Okay.
All right, are we back at a motion for recess, Valerie?
Yes, yes. And I will just say that refer to the screen for public comment rules, and comments will be accepted until the end of the recess. So we're ready for a motion now.
James. No, go ahead, Alfonso, you got it.
I, Alfonso Gonzalez, move for the 30-minute recess.
And I, James, second.
Thank you. It's been moved by Commissioner Gonzalez, second by Commissioner James to break for a 30-minute recess. Roll call vote. Todd James.
Yes.
Tamara Eggins.
Yes.
Jose Alvarez.
Yes.
Ramiro Diaz.
Yes.
Alfonso Gonzalez.
Yay.
Matthew Rufo.
Yes.
And Candace Forrest. Yes. 7 yeas, no nays. The motion carries, and we're now in recess.
Are we ready to return from recess?
Tell if we have a quorum. I'm trying to see who all is. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like we have quorum.
All right, thank you. Would the board consider a motion to return from recess?
I, Todd James, so move.
Alvarez seconds.
It's been moved by Commissioner James, second by Commissioner Alvarez to return from recess. Roll call vote. Todd James,
Yes.
Tamara Eggins,
Yes.
Jose Alvarez,
Yes.
Ramiro Diaz,
Yes.
Alfonso Gonzalez,
Yay.
Matthew Rufo,
Yes.
and Candace Forrest. Yes. 7 yeas, no nays. The motion carries, and we're back from recess.
Thank you. The public comment form is now closed, and we will begin with the consideration of dockets and the public comment portion of the meeting. We will begin with unfinished business for variances. The first item is BZA docket 07821 for the property at 10100 Morrison Road. The request is for variances to permit the construction of a daycare with excessive front yard setback, a primary entrance not oriented to the street, insufficient ground floor transparency on the primary street, insufficient ceiling height, and parking as the predominant visual element. As a reminder to the board, the staff recommendation is for a 60-day deferral. And don't think there were no comments received for this item, so no need for rebuttal.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Madam Chair, if I could present a motion.
Yes, proceed.
Madam Chair, with regards to docket number BZA 078-21, I, Todd James, move to grant a 60-day deferral.
Alfonso second.
It's been moved by Commissioner James, second by Commissioner Gonzalez to defer the matter 60 days at the request of the applicant. Roll call vote. Todd James,
Yes.
Tamara Eggins,
Yes.
Jose Alvarez,
Yes.
Ramiro Diaz,
Yes.
Alfonso Gonzalez,
Yay.
Matthew Rufo,
Yes.
and Candace Forrest. Yes. 7 yeas, no nays. The motion carries. Next item.
Thank you. Item number 2, BZA docket 06721 was withdrawn by the applicant. We will now begin with new business for variances. The next item is BZA docket 00422 for the property at 9301 River Road. The request is for a variance to permit the construction of a single-family residence with excessive building height. As a reminder to the board, the staff recommendation is for denial. We do have one public comment for this item in support of the application. Shannon Smiley at 5200 St. Bernard Avenue. Hello, my name is Shannon Smiley. My representative was unable to attend the meeting due to a family emergency. I do not have the proper login, but I am available for any questions.
It was actually the property owner who ended up presenting, so she doesn't get another opportunity.
Okay.
Thank you.
Was that the only comment, Valerie?
I'm sorry, yes, that was the only comment for this item.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments from board members?
Yeah, I have one. So the comment about reducing the height of the garage doesn't seem to, if I'm reading this correctly, it doesn't seem to affect the main dwelling, which is where the height issue is. Maybe I'm not understanding.
Rami, I think what she meant to say is that bottom of the framing at 10 feet, that frames the ground floor, the second floor. She was taking that, they were saying that take that slab or that framing down 2 feet to be 8 feet, so it reduces technically 2 feet of the overall height of the entire structure. That was my understanding. So still, she is, or I mean, the it's about 3 feet, I guess, still, right?
Right. Yeah, okay, I guess that was confusing me because the garage is a separate structure, so.
Yeah, actually, Ram, if you look at page 0.6 in the drawings, section 3 shows that height clearance, 10 feet clear on the first floor. And if you look at the elevations, you'll see the garage doors are on the, I'm gonna say the east side of the drawing. I think that's incorrect with my orientation, but it does show it on the 0.7 drawing too.
Got it. Yeah, I was looking at the detached structure as well. So yeah, okay. I understand. Lots of garages. Okay.
Yep. And the comment I made earlier, I just wanted to verify what BFE was, but going back to the elevations on 0.9, it is taken from the finished floor slab. So the overall building height is taken from slab and not from grade. So I think that just helps further clarify it even further that, I mean, if they're going to make the mitigating height change, there's something there. And a lot of this is really tied to that midpoint of roof and how that roof is being, at least just the slope of the roof is what's really driving the height beyond the initial request at the garage level.
Yeah, and my suggestion was going to be that, you know, the width of the building is driving the height of that roof. So if it were a narrower building,
it'll come down.
Bring that roof down. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah. Okay.
Yeah, or progressively they could probably reduce a little bit of floor and floor heights. I think they have 12-foot high floor to floor.
Mm-hmm. And I think if I saw correctly in the staff report, I mean, they even mentioned that if we were to grant this as submitted, they did have a list of provisos that were applicable if we saw that the remaining 4 criteria was still met. And just kind of knowing the nature of the development pattern along Patterson. I mean, I don't know about overall building heights along that stretch because I know some of those homes are a lot older. Just the way that this house is designed seems to be a lot in alignment with majority of structures along that stretch. Just not sure about overall building heights.
So what do you guys, I mean, based on the applicant is not here and whoever was going to speak with their engineer is not here, would it be prudent to?
I am here.
Oh, you're there. Okay.
Yes, I am here. I am the applicant.
Yeah.
Okay. And what you said, there is a garage on that first floor as well. So, and then we also have the separate garage. So just due to flood policy and the expense, you know, we wanted to have the garage underneath and then the main floor is the second floor.
So there's almost, go ahead.
I was just going to ask what the flood requirement was here because
It's 7.4 NAVD.
Right. So, but the elevation here is probably like 10 or 12. So what is the height of the site relative to the height? Because NAVD is relative to sea level, not to the land. So what is the height of the land?
That probably was for the engineer. I'm sorry, I don't have that with me.
Totally understand. Yeah. So I think that from just based on what I know of the topography of this place, I would assume that the requirement is really more like the 3 feet above the grade, not that 7.5 feet. So you measure from the highest adjacent grade. Is that correct, Todd, for the overall height or staff?
Right. If there's an established curve off from grade. And even if it's from the crest of Patterson.
Right. Well, and that might be problematic because that's going to be higher than the site.
Right.
So So that's, I think, a technical question for your engineers, like where are we measuring from exactly?
Right.
It says in the section, it says height above adjacent grade assumed to be, it's kind of in there. So I think that maybe answers the question.
And it's shown as and Rami, it's shown as an AE zone.
Yeah.
And some of the ones that were surveyed were one-story homes that, the older homes. But if you go further down River Road, a lot of them have the garage underneath. And then, the next main level. And then a lot of them have, 3 levels. But I don't think on the report, none of the 3 levels were surveyed.
But again, Rami, so no matter whatever we see the BFE at, that's why I made that mention in the sections. It's being based off of the finished floor slab, not grade. So where this is different, remember when we reviewed the case on Moss Street, height was being taken from grade and not from finished floor.
Right. Yeah, I guess what I'm looking at in the section is the HEAG note. The HEAG assumed at -4.
Yep.
And then the first floor is at 0. So it's already in the section to the benchmark. So yeah,
right.
I think we're saying the same thing. It's in the drawing.
Yep.
But that doesn't resolve. I mean, I think I see options in the design opportunities to reduce or just reshape the building, which would then get that height down to be within the 35-foot mean roof elevation.
Because right now the roof, and it's really just more at the roof slope.
Yeah.
Because it's at 7 and 12 on the pitch.
Right. So I guess my recommendation would be to defer so that the engineer could get some time to look at this and maybe look at some other options to get that mean roof elevation height down based on either the shape of the building or the pitch of the roof or the height, floor to floor heights.
Yep. Maybe changing the roof height to 6 and 12, so it's a 1 and 2 slope. That still gives them a pretty decent height inside that attic. The second one, and I think it's just more important for us to at least have the drawing, at least one plan referencing the change, preferably these building sections and the overall building elevations, just to make that modification showing the bottom of framing at 8 feet and just some type of change at the roof slope of 12 to 6, or maybe, I mean, look, the lowest you'll probably go is 12 to 4 because we don't want to put you in a situation where you're speccing a roof system that doesn't meet warranty. And I know often you want to have a respect for it being 4 to 12 to kind of keep that into play. I know if you go to 4 to 12, that may impact how the roof is shaped and may just take some things out of whack. But there's just at least 2 mitigating factors that's there. One which you've already offered, and the second, just looking at your roof slopes without having to really impact the floor plan.
Okay, awesome.
Are there any other questions from board members? I know you mentioned a possible deferral. So to Ms. Smiley, is that something that you're amenable to?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So just keep in context when we're talking about that roof. Right now, you have an attic space that's almost 12 feet tall inside the attic.
Okay.
So
okay,
kind of, yeah.
I'll talk to the engineer. I'll let him know.
There's at least 2 or 3. We're not going to get too far into how to do the design details, but there's I see 1 or 2 ways that it could easily be changed just to help change that part. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Smiley. Any other questions, comments from board members? And never mind. Is there a motion?
If a motion's in order.
Yes, proceed.
Madam Chair, with regards to BZA docket number 004-22, I, Ty James, move for a 30-day deferral I know that is a tighter window of time, but I think the changes we're talking about are really can just be taken care of in notation and sent back to staff for review. So my motion is for that 30-day deferral.
And I second Rami.
That was actually going to be my question, and then I realized that it probably could be, so.
It's a quick, it's a couple note changes that could be.
Yeah. It's been moved by Commissioner James, second by Commissioner Diaz to defer the matter 30 days. Roll call vote, Todd James,
Yes.
Tamara Eggins,
Yes.
Jose Alvarez,
Yay.
Ramiro Diaz,
Yes.
Alfonso Gonzalez,
Yay.
Matthew Rufo,
Yes.
and Candace Forrest, yes. 7 yeas, no nays, the motion carries. Next item.
Next item is BZA docket 00522 for the property at 1510 through 1512 Maria Street. The request is for variances to permit the construction of a single-family residence resulting in insufficient interior side yards, insufficient rear yard, and insufficient open space ratio. As a reminder to the board, the staff recommendation is for approval subject to 3 provisos. And we did not have public comment for this item. No need for rebuttal.
Are there any questions or comments from board members? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I think based on what we see and just the explanation of just how tight this site is, I think is pretty self-explanatory. Unless anybody else sees otherwise. So Madam Chair, for motions in order.
Yes, proceed.
Madam Chair, requested BZA docket number 005-22. I, Todd James, move to accept the staff's recommendation for the requested waivers of Article 9, Section 9, 3A, Table 9.2, and move for approval with the 3 provisos as noted and that the 9 criteria have been met, if I didn't mention that before.
Alfonso, second.
It's been moved by Commissioner James, second by Commissioner Gonzalez to grant the requested waivers, finding that the 9 criteria have been met and subject to 3 provisos. Roll call vote, Todd James,
Yes.
Tamara Eggins,
Yes.
Jose Alvarez,
Yes.
Ramiro Diaz,
Yes.
Alfonso Gonzalez,
Yay.
Matthew Rufo,
Yay.
and Candace Forrest, yay. 7 yeas, no nays, the motion carries. Next item.
Thank you. The next item is BZA docket 006-22 for the property at 1717 Canal Street. This request is for variances to permit the construction of a mixed-use development, retail, multifamily residence with insufficient lot area and insufficient permeable open space. As a reminder to the board, the staff recommendation is for approval subject to 5 provisos. We do have public comment for this item. The first comment is in support of the application. Joseph P.H. Babington, 150 Government Street, Suite 2000, Mobile, Alabama, 36602. Babington Properties, LP, and 1717 Canal, LLC, owners of 1717 Canal Street. Our family is the owner of this site with hospitals across the street. We sought to complement the corridor by developing the property in 2017 with housing using a HUD loan. We have been working with HUD and the State Historic Preservation Office for years, and after multiple delays, including COVID, we are ready to move the same project forward. We learned our variance lapsed, so we are asking the BZA to approve the same variance a second time so that we may build the project. The next comment is in support of the application. T.J. LaCory, 643 Magazine Street. I am proud to be the developer of this project, which will be transformative for the corridor. I want to thank the BZA for recognizing the hardship and approving the same variance in 2017. We ask that you do so again so that we may add much needed housing at an accessible price point. The next comment is in support of the application. 547 Barone Street, Suite 100, New Orleans, LA 70113. As a member of the development team, I respectfully ask the BZA to approve this variance. With respect to density, we are not asking to build anything larger or build bigger than is already allowed. If we build a hotel or an office building, we are simply asking to allow more residential units within the existing allowable height, bulk in the hardships that have been identified, in light of the hardships that have been identified. The next comment is in support of the application. Hanson Babington, 119 White Avenue, Fairhope, Alabama, 36532. I want to thank the BZA for its recognition for approval. We ask the BZA to approve this variance. And that is the end of the comments for this item. And we had no opposition, so no need for rebuttal.
Okay, are there any questions or comments from board members?
So, Missy, just to kind of revisit what we discussed earlier regarding proviso number 5, what we would suggest is just modifying the language to state something along the lines of beyond having what's there, but say as long as this does not supersede any pending review from safety and permits. Is that safe enough?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay, Mr. Sherman, you're fine with that recommendation?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. James.
Thank you. No further questions, Chairwoman.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments from any board members? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Yeah, Madam Chair, with regards to BZA docket 006-22, my motion is to, I, Todd James, move to accept the staff's recommendation with one modification of the report. Moving for approval of Article 15, Section 15.3A1 for Table 15.2. Accepting staff's recommendation with the five provisos with modification to proviso number 5, adding the language at the tail end of that statement where as long as this proviso does not supersede any future any future determinations provided by the Department of Safety and Permits.
Alfonso, second.
Thank you. It's been moved by Commissioner James, second by Commissioner Gonzalez to grant the requested waivers as it relates to BZA docket 006-22, finding that the 9 criteria have been met and subject to 5 provisos, noting the revision to proviso number 5. Roll call vote. Todd James.
Yes.
Tamara Eggins.
Yes.
Jose Alvarez.
Yes.
Ramiro Diaz.
Yes.
Alfonso Gonzalez.
Yay.
Matthew Rufo.
Yes.
And Candace Forrest. Yes. 7 yeas, no nays. The motion carries. Next item.
Thank you, board members.
You're welcome.
Okay, now we will move on to new business for decision appeals. The next item is BZA docket 007-22 for the property at 917 through 919 8th Street. This is an appeal of the decision of the Director of the Department of Safety and Permits regarding the determination that the property has not attained legal non-conforming status for a 5-unit multifamily development. And we did not have any public comments for this item. No rebuttal needed.
Are there any questions or comments from board members? I know we discussed the particular item being deferred, and Mr. Kendall, you recommended needing a little time to be able to review any documents. So if a deferral was granted, would 60 days be sufficient?
Yes, 60 days should be sufficient.
Any questions or comments from board members?
For motions in order.
Yes, proceed.
Madam Chair, with regards to BZA docket number 007-22, my motion is for a 60-day deferral at the request of Department of Safety and Permits and the applicant to allow them time to button up whatever loose documentation may need to still be provided.
Alvarez seconds.
Thank you. It's been moved by Commissioner James, second by Commissioner Alvarez to defer BZA docket 007-22 for 60 days. Roll call vote. Todd James,
Yes.
Tamara Eggins,
Yes.
Jose Alvarez,
Yes.
Ramiro Diaz,
Yes.
Alfonso Gonzalez,
Yay.
Matthew Rufo,
Yes.
and Candace Forrest. Yay. 7 yays, no nays. The motion carries. Next item.
Sorry, I'm trying to get to my button so I can unmute myself. The next item is BZA docket 00822 for the property at 2043 Oretha Castle Haley Boulevard. This is an appeal of the decision of the Director of the Department of Safety and Permits regarding the determination that new short-term rentals must be developed under the residential guidelines. And we do have a couple of comments for this one. And the first comment is in support of the application. Kaylin Baz, 234 Loyola Street or Loyola Avenue. I am a nearby neighbor and I support this project by SMS Development. I have seen the plans and I like the way the neighborhood is developing. The next comment is in support of the application. Kendra Manson, 348 Villette Street, New Orleans, LA 70114. This project would meet the need for available housing in New Orleans. And that's the end of the comments for this item and no opposition, so no need for rebuttal. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Was that the last one?
There's another.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I see it now. In opposition of this, oh wait. Hold on, I'm just gonna go to my screen here. All right. Okay, next. Margetta Rogers, 2116 Oretha Castle Haley Boulevard, in opposition of this application. I am the owner occupant of a nearby residence and do not support the developer's appeal and support the interpretation of the city planner. The design of the project does not align with the intent of the HUMU zoning and is not a welcome addition to the neighborhood. The developer is essentially trying to cherry pick from the lesser of the different requirements, which results in a development with too much density and is not in alignment with the design guidelines. I would like to also note that proper notification was not provided for this hearing. We own 3 addresses on the notification list and received nothing. None of the neighbors received any notification that there was also no sign posted, and there was also no sign posted. Please provide a Zoom link for the meeting so I can attend. The next comment is in opposition of the application. Donald Forche, 1740 Barone Street, New Orleans, LA. I am opposed to the person trying to appeal safety and permits. We live in the Muses Apartments, just a few blocks away from the work on OC Haley. I also have 2 commercial short-term rentals in the city, including one in the house I used to live in, which is a single-family residence, and I have one in a duplex. So I see the issue from all sides. I followed the rules, and this developer is trying to change the rules. I know commercial short-term rentals can be A single family house can be in single family homes, doubles, triplexes, fourplexes, or bigger. They are used within buildings and most of the time residential buildings. This person is trying to build something larger than is allowable by pretending this is a commercial building, so they don't have setbacks and things like that. It is a residential building with a commercial use. I'm trying to be fair, but I can still make money and give the neighborhood a pretty building. Please let safety and permits ruling stand. And that is the end of the comments for this item. So since we did have opposition, the applicant has 5 minutes to rebut. Thank
you, Valerie. I'll try to keep it less than 4. Thank you again, board, for listening, hearing us before. I wanted to kind of pick up on a couple of specific things, and in fact, we even look at the notes on the opposition there, where there's clearly this identification of commercial use. While everybody understands that there's a large amount of history with residential use applications with short-term rentals, it's very clear and apparent why. Because prior to 2019, commercial short-term rentals, again, were even listed as residential uses. I'd ask the members of the board to ask themselves this question. A permitted use in the HUMU is a micro distillery. If this 4th space was a micro distillery, would we have any discussion about this? If it was any other permitted commercial use in that table, would there be any question about it? If it was a medical dental clinic, if it was a micro distillery, if it was an office, if it was anything else, again, we wouldn't have that discussion because it's very clearly identified in the use table as a commercial use. I think that's one of the biggest things here is, and again, we can understand where any sorts of thoughts and ideas come from, but we have to be very clear as to what the language in the CZO says. And while sometimes, being able to look at the thing holistically and choose what's right for you, that's what any property owner should be allowed to do. I fully feel for the department and the city in this particular one, because again, it technically goes against the nature of the history of how this thing has been interpreted. But unfortunately, the letter of the law, the black letter of the law, and the person being, negatively impacted right here is the property owner, when there is not a looking up the use in the table, identifying and agreeing that it's a commercial use and moving on. One of the things that I find most, interesting is the city's actual agreement in their page 2 of their letter, that they do look at the parking requirements for commercial short-term rentals. They allow the commercial exceptions and exemptions. So in the same argument, it's a commercial for some parts of the CZO and it's not commercial for other parts of the CZO. We know that that's just improper. We get why. Again, they're in a very tough position here, but it's just incalculable that somebody's going to look at something one way and something another way, especially again with that. I hate to be extremely repetitive, but the addition of that word residential, where in a lot of cases where the word residential doesn't exist. Again, where I was before, if this was a bar, any applicant would have to identify that use and they would get their license later. We also look at, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are, but before the law changed, we had dozens and dozens and dozens of applicants applying to the department, identifying that they would have short-term rentals in their usages before laws changed. People do that all the time so that they can bake in that zoning. So it is actually very useful that people identify the actual intended use, the same way the department shouldn't honor and give COs to something if they were to switch the zoning at a later time. Again, the gap can be closed. That's up to the city council. If they want to do that, that's up to the department, but we have to go based on what's today. Again, the best, clearest argument is to say, what happens if this is any one of the other permitted uses in that table? It's very clear. There's no question as to how we're going to get there. There's conversations about what the standards do. Again, those are design things. We're here talking about whether this is a commercial use or not. So with that said, I want to turn this thing over back to you guys and ready for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Just a quick question to clarify for staff. I noticed that one of the comments mentioned that all of the property owners weren't notified and that there wasn't a sign posted. Can we just get confirmation on whether or not that actually happened?
Yeah, so I believe it was this individual that reached out to our department last week. She provided my colleague one of the addresses in question, and he verified that it was on the list of mailed notice. And the postcards were mailed in advance of the 15-day requirement. I believe it was 17 days out. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on. I know personally I've had some delays with USPS recently. I think it took about a week and a half for some mail I sent to get somewhere else in the city. So I'm not sure if that's what's going on there. I'm happy to look into the other two addresses in question. We did provide signage to the Department of Safety and Permits as well. It is their responsibility to go out and post those signs. I don't know if Nick has information about when those were posted. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Missy, just to clarify, the attempt would be sufficient in this regard that the applicant did provide proof that the mailings went out. It's not on the applicant that the mail was delayed.
Right. I'm trying to pull up the exact language, but it says that any deficiency of notice not shut, but even though we have made the proper attempt, shall not invalidate the notice.
Okay. Once it came up, I just wanted to make sure we at least brought that up and confirmed that everything was done appropriately.
And the posting of signage on the site is the responsibility of the department or the applicant?
So we don't post signage on the site. We post signs on the telephone poles on kind of the corners of the square that it's located on. So there isn't the same signage that you would get for a variance application.
Got it.
And
So
I'd have to confirm with our.
it's not the same poster, like yard sign that you traditionally see for, all right, just making sure so it's clear the difference between the two.
Yes, that's correct. And I'm sorry, I can't confirm whether or not. I'd have to check with our inspectors to see if the posting was done and when it was done. So unfortunately, I don't have that information at this time.
But again, it's the department who posted, not the applicant, which is different again for waivers and variances where an applicant would go out and post a sign.
And
yes,
just to
that is correct.
Close this, are the Notice Me app, the city's Notice Me app, do these show up on that? Or there's just the zoning and HTLC?
Yes, appeals do show up on the Notice Me email updates.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments from our board members?
Who's starting?
Tag, you're it, Rami.
I can't get past what the thing looks like on the inside in terms of the floor plan, based on what a commercial use or what you would expect to see in a mixed use building. If I were to put a brewery in here, I would take the whole first floor and make it a brewery. So that's where I have a little challenge with that argument. I guess could you turn one of these into an office and take advantage of commercial? So I don't know. I just have a hard time seeing this as a mixed use building and not for townhouses based on the design of it. Which I'm not sure how that, I guess I'm just befuddled by the argument. So I just keep looking at this as a fourplex and that they're 4 dwelling units.
Any other questions or comments from board members? I kind of understand now what Mr. Smith was mentioning, that it is a little bit complex. So I was just trying to read through just to follow the logic again, but I don't know if there are any other questions or comments that anyone has. I'm trying to figure, are you raising your hand, Mr. Smith? You can go ahead.
Thank you. And I try to do my best to not unmute. To that point, and to Commissioner Diaz's point, I hear you, and that's why the simplicity of the use table is there. If we regulated what floor plans look like, if we regulated all these particular things, that would be the question at hand. The crux of this position is that we have a use that's clearly identified as a permitted use in that area. We have an applicant who has identified wanting to use that use in this structure. And because of the history of the elephant in the room short-term rentals, where things again have evolved, pre-2019 rule change that went effective December 1st, 2019, and the present, we have things that again used to be looked at as residential uses, whereas of course they're now commercial uses because they're very cleanly there. So I understand the hey, it might not look like a brewery or an office. That at the end of the day, respectfully, I don't think is as important, because a commercial short-term rental is clearly identified as a commercial use. And the applicant has ahead of time identified the use. In any other type of use, and you guys see this all the time, the applicant is required to tell you what they plan to do with the building. It's to the department's advantage that if for some reason this applicant decides to change it at the last second, like one of those potential what if scenarios that was presented to you, the department can simply hold the CO, keep power from happening, and say, no, we permitted you for X, Y, and Z, and you failed to do X, Y, and Z. So again, the burden is on the applicant here to go build what's permitted use, as what they're asking for and what they're saying. And I completely understand, again, that this thing looks like certain things. It absolutely does look like what you're looking at. But we've got to remember that the use table is important. The use table is the law, and it's the most recent thing that's been changed, clearly pushing it there. It was an intentional change of the city council to make this thing commercial so that commercial short-term rental units would act more like commercial uses. And at the same point, why do we have a city that's looking at parking requirements under the commercial lens, but not looking at it under the other way? And these are those kind of important things. So I kind of not push back, but I respectfully, remind you of that again, it might not look like a micro distillery, because again, this is not a micro distillery, it's a commercial short-term rental unit. And therein lies the issue. So that's why it's a very complex sounding set of things, Commissioner Forrest. But at the end of the day, if this is any other use category here, and again, none of those use categories have these specific floor plan requirements, neither does this one. It meets all of the things it's required to, including the fact that it's a commercial use identified in advance in line with the permitted uses in the use table. With that said, the applicant has had a history on this one of working it with the safety and permits and the CPC, and it's been moving and moving and moving, and here we are. So the crux of this really is, does the board not agree that a commercial short-term rental is a conditional use, or is the table wrong? Is the council wrong, and have they committed some sort of error? If this was the old table from pre-December 1st, 2019, I'd say maybe there's an error if it would have been there. This was intentionally moved below the residential use into the commercial use.
And just a quick question, because I'm looking. I didn't see you, Ms. Becknell. Hi.
Hi, I'm sorry. I just wanted to correct a point that Mr. Smith made.
And also, do we have something like a written report from the department? I didn't see, maybe I'm missing it, but I didn't see anything in our.
In the second link.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Go ahead,
And
Ms.
one of the
McNeil.
things that I wanted to jump in to correct is Mr. Smith said that the project met all of the zoning requirements for a commercial use, but that's not in fact correct. It does not meet the transparency requirements for commercial use in this zoning district. So the argument that they have presented a compliant commercial development is not accurate. They are trying to, I understand the desire to have more space here, but they can't have this both ways.
Okay, thank you. I knew I had seen something, I couldn't find it, and I had a note written somewhere, and I just couldn't figure out what it was referencing. Thank
And
you.
to that point, I know Zach wants to say something, but I think this is related and maybe, so I wasn't necessarily totally clear because I'm sort of still befuddled by the argument here, but I think you clarified it, Ashley, that, you know, the shape of the building, the form of the building, if we're not really looking at the plan, there's things that are in the setback requirements and others, and correct me if I'm wrong, that would be one way if it was a true commercial building, and it would be a different way if it was residential. And so I think that's where this, to me at least, feels like, yeah, it shouldn't look like a Houston townhouse and be a commercial mixed use building with ground floor commercial and apartments above, if that's the argument here. So I guess I'm having a little, conundrum here. So Zach.
Yeah, the thing that we need to point out, and I apologize if there was the statement made or if it was heard, I'll chalk it up to my words, that it's completely compliant. We understand that there's standards that are going to be triggered that will require some redesigns and tweaking to this design. We understand that the decision that you guys make today is not an absolute green light on a permit being issued this afternoon. We're here talking about the commercial use being a commercial use. We're here talking about commercial short-term rental. We're completely understanding of the fact that there's building standards, design standards in the HUMU. So it is important to note, to say that's not a conversation that we brought up because we understand them. We don't necessarily disagree with them. And that's something for redesigns. That's not a situation of having to go to the Board of Zoning Adjustments to ask if what 50% transparency means. That's going to be, again, black and white. We're going to be able to do that via some tweaks to the design so that gets worked out administratively with the city. So I understand that the presentation of a plan goes, but what we've appealed, and what's important to go back to what we've appealed is, we have you're going to have to use a certain part of the CZO that covers residential, even though commercial short-term rental is clearly on every table in the CZO, a commercial use. So to your point, Mr. Commissioner, and to the departments, yeah, there's definitely other things there. We completely understand that we can't have the cake and eat it on this one. There's going to be some tweaks because they're absolutely right. When this is looked at as when this is correctly looked at as commercial, there will be applications of the rest of the CZO for commercial applications that will have to be applied. So I'm glad that point was brought up because we are 100% supportive of making this compliant with the entirety of the CZO, everything we've been trying to do since the beginning.
And I just want to go back. I guess I don't see Ms. Becknell anymore, so I guess to, oh, I see, I'm sorry. I'm trying to look at all of the faces. So I don't know if it's either to you, Ashley, or to you, Nick, but I'm just trying to understand in the context of short-term rentals, it is generally, and correct me if I'm wrong, a temporary license. Is that correct? Is it not something that is, and I'm asking that because in terms of other commercial uses, there's more of a permanence. Whereas in this scenario, short-term rental is something that's temporary that doesn't necessarily change the underlying zoning of the property. Is that correct?
So it is generally short-term rentals, much like ABOs, have two licensing components. Not only do they have to meet the zoning requirements, but they also have to meet municipal code licensure requirements. So while you may have the underlying right in the zoning code to have a commercial short-term rental, through non-compliance with the city code, it's possible for you to lose the right to have a license to operate that short-term rental, which means that you would not actually be using that property as a commercial short-term rental. You would essentially be using it as a dwelling unit. And that goes back to the point that these are more appropriately considered dwelling units in design, if not in use, depending on the situation.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to get the right way to say it, because that's kind of the concern, is that ultimately the underlying condition is still residential, so that in the event that the license for a short-term rental is not used, you still have that underlying condition. And that if you get out of that condition, then it becomes sort of an out of compliance structure.
That's correct. The CZO specifically says that short-term rentals must take place in dwelling units. So we have that. There's also the fact that if I live, if my private home were in a commercial development, commercial zone, and I applied for a commercial short-term rental unit, I could possibly just never use that and live in my home when that would not be a permitted use. I understand that that's an enforcement problem rather than a front-end zoning problem in that particular example, but just to demonstrate some of the complexity going into this question that's unfortunately not quite as simple as we would like it to be. Nick, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate the difference of a commercial short-term rental use and some of the other commercial uses that were mentioned, like a bar or an office or a distillery, is that, the requirement for a commercial short-term rental is that it has to be in a dwelling unit. So, and that dwelling unit is a residential use. So your office or micro distillery would, from a design standpoint, be completely different because those are commercial in design, whereas the commercial short-term rental does have to be within that residential dwelling unit.
Are there any other questions or comments from board members? Mr. Smith, I'm sorry, I don't have all of the screens up, so that's why I don't see you. So if you were raising your hand before, I just didn't see it. Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Just as one final thing to kind of reiterate, again, and I appreciate that the city kind of talked about how, yes, it can be more of an enforcement issue. There are many things that get permitted on day one, and developers, owners, contractors, they build something else. And that happens in other use categories, residential and commercial alike. And it's important that those things through proper enforcement are taken in there. If this particular property were to somehow theoretically get a commercial short-term rental license, which would be permitted because the commercial use would have been permitted since it's in the table, and that property owner were to ever have that license taken away, while it is possible that somebody would use it as a residential dwelling unit, it does not legally fall back to being this residential dwelling unit, because again, we're using the word residential dwelling unit. When
Mr. Smith, I would ask, if that's true, then what would it revert to? If it's designed to function as a dwelling unit?
I appreciate the interjection to my commentary. And I would say at this point, you would have a vacant commercial use until the Department of Safety and Permits and the project and the property owner would figure out a way to get it into compliance. The same way if a bar was built today and the bar had its license revoked, it doesn't mean that it just turns into anything else legally. Of course, people on this city can do all sorts of illegal things all the time. We're here discussing this particular use request, not the hypotheticals of what happens in the event the commercial short-term rental license is removed. And I apologize, board, for responding to someone else's questions other than your own.
But I guess what I'm struggling with is somewhat related to what Ms. Beck now brings up. The first requirement is that a short-term rental is licensed to a residential unit. So I'm trying to understand how we get away from it being a residential unit, or I'm sorry, a residential dwelling. I'm forgetting how you referenced it, Ms. Beck now, but I'm trying to understand how you get out of what that first requirement is.
I'm assuming that question was for me, Commissioner Forrest?
I'm not sure if it's for you or for the department. I guess it is for you since you're asking for this determination. So I'm trying to understand how you get away from that first requirement.
The biggest part here is the fact that, again, and you've said it, I think 3 times there, residential dwelling unit. The term residential dwelling unit does not appear in those standards that keep getting referred to. The second to last, actually the last paragraph of the city's opposition page to us, again, incorrectly added the word residential dwelling unit. There's a lot of emphasis because, again, prior to December 1st, 2019, all short-term rental units were residential uses. It didn't matter if they had the word commercial in front of them or not. We are looking at this because the definition of dwelling unit does not use the word residential. The standards that keep getting thrown out related to Article 20 about dwelling units keep having the word residential added. It does not mention the word residential anywhere. And I find this to actually be supportive of our position here, because, again, commercial short-term rentals are a commercial use. We keep going down the hypotheticals here. There's this addition of language of words that don't exist. And there's this kind of, I don't want to say failure, because I know everybody sees it and reads it. The commercial word is the only word that is consistent across the board. Commercial short-term rentals being in commercial permitted use in the commercial use section of the table. And we keep forgetting about the word that's right there on the page, commercial, and we keep adding, unfortunately, incorrectly, the word residential to things like dwelling unit. We go to Article 26, dwelling unit does not, again, contain the word residential in the term or in any part of the definition. I understand where there's a lot of people that would say, well, that just doesn't make any sense. That is what the words say. That's what the law says. And again, we're distracting ourselves from commercial being commercial being commercial. Any other commercial use, this is hands down. This has a long history of being residential, and it makes all the sense in the world why everybody has a hard time kind of wrapping their head around it.
So to get back to Ms., I'm sorry, go ahead, Commissioner James.
Yeah, just real quick. So I'm gonna play devil's advocate real quick. We talk about dwelling units, but question more to the department. In the case of if we're inside of a commercial or mixed use zoning district where hotels may be allowed or through conditional use, cannot a multi-unit building, a multi-unit hotel also apply for a commercial SDR license?
Your question for me, I'm assuming that's for the
Goes
department.
to the department.
They would have to meet the requirements for a commercial short-term rental, which would include that they were composed of dwelling units, each of which has their own independent facilities for sanitation, cooking, et cetera, as defined in dwelling unit. I would also say that while dwelling unit doesn't use the word residential, the definition for dwelling expressly does.
That was going to be the question I was going to ask, was what was considered a dwelling unit? So that I think you kind of answered my question.
Dwelling units defined in Chapter 26 as a room or group of rooms providing complete independent living facilities, including permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation for one or more persons. And Mr. Smith's correct, it doesn't say residential, but it does use living multiple times. And the definition for dwelling, not dwelling unit, does also say that it is a portion or a structure used for permanent residential purposes. Again, slightly different context, but just to provide a clear and complete record.
Can I ask a quick question? I'm feeling dense today. Are these townhouses or multifamily? What's the definition? They look like townhouses to me, but I'm not clear. And I know there's some subtle differences in or are the differences the same in the bulk and height and design standards for?
And that's even if a townhouse is allowed, because in more often than not, townhouses are conditional use, correct?
Townhouses are permitted in, I think, most mixed-use districts. It's probably just your kind of two-family districts where you're going to find townhouses as a conditional use. And yeah, I'm fairly certain these things meet the definition for a townhouse, because the townhouse definition looks at kind of, you have each unit, you don't have another unit above or below a separate unit. So since these are all kind of right there in a line, I think this would meet the townhouse definition.
But I think in a townhouse, it has to be a minimum of 18 feet. Is that right?
Yes, there are different bulk and yard standards for townhouses than there are for multifamily dwellings.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I'm having a hard time, like, what is the difference between whether it's commercial or, multifamily, or, what are the zoning differences that we're looking at here exactly in terms of the design, other than the, ground floor permeability, visibility thing? Yeah, I just can't get past that. I just see these as 4 townhouses, and that they just seem really straightforward to me as 4 units. Now I guess you could have a commercial townhouse somehow, or like a vertical commercial space, but I'm just still, if we're looking at the building as just a box and not really looking at the floor plan, but we spend so much time looking at the actual floor plan as we analyze buildings, and there's so many requirements about square footage of apartments and how things, that all go together to make the picture. The code here is not just the outside of the building has to meet a certain requirement. There's other things within the building that help define use and function and square footages. And anyway.
Commissioner Diaz, to your question, I would say, I don't think there's anybody on I'll call it either side of this that's debating, what the floor plan looks like. It's never come up in question. And one of the things about here to I think answer on behalf of, again, kind of both sides of thought on this, is the agreement that a commercial short-term rental is in fact a commercial use, again, as per the table, clearly laying out, does have significant ramifications on townhouse, multifamily / mixed use, because it does come into play. And that was one of the points I made in the original part, where if we were to take this same logic, the same logic being applied to this property by the city, it would effectively have banned commercial short-term rentals, which are clearly permitted uses in the C2 district, where the council has clearly said that they are permitted and they should be allowed, because of the lack of differentiation. There's no set, for singles and doubles, you do this, for townhouses, you do this, for multifamily, you do this, for mixed use, you do this. It effectively means, hey, it's not going to be in there. We would have a real issue where in a C2 district, commercial short-term rentals, by the city's logic, would allow residential uses to have to be designed like commercial buildings because there's nothing else. And it's that sort of, again, I'll use the term cherry picking, which is why we're here. We have, again, admittedly, a group that says, hey, commercial use parking applies here, but it doesn't apply there. And if we go to that C2, if we want to be uniform across the CZO, which I think everybody's intent is to do that, I would never say that's something that nobody wants. If we took the same logic from the HUMU discussion we're having here and we applied it in the C2, we would get an absurdity where the department would have to say, oh, well, you either have to build it like a commercial use, because there's no differentiation between the two, or you're now prohibited use, whereas the commercial short-term rental is clearly a permitted use in the C2. And it's that reading across the entirety of the CZO to say that's one of the great lenses to bring this thing back to its basics. We can get distracted on townhouse all day. We can get distracted on multifamily, mixed use. The question is, do we have, and I probably see you shaking your head, I'm saying there is the biggest philosophical debate here is, are commercial short-term rentals commercial uses? And if the answer is yes, based on what the table is clearly showing, then everything else falls into line. It means the standards for commercial buildings apply to us. It means other things related to commercial buildings apply to us. We're not asking to get out of any of that. We're just asking for basically this refereeing of our commercial short-term rentals clearly identified as commercial uses and therefore subject to the commercial use standards.
Are you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I asked the question about hotel earlier Well, just looking at from base standards, because the comment that was Ms. Becknell made posed a question about what does it default to? If it defaults to residential units based on its construction type. I mean, if it was just to stay modified as it is, how it by plan it would default to multifamily or the townhome. But if someone was to still come back and say, well, no, I'm gonna use, if there's another proposed use, they still come back and say hotel, subject to some modifications of the floor plan, because I know that there's some underlying defining elements like a lobby and things of that nature that would have to qualify it there, but those units could still qualify as a hotel in some capacity, subject to modification. But I'm just trying, and that's why I was just trying to get some clarity around how this really works, because it's the unfortunate side is three people that we're used to seeing over years from one side of the coin on two different sides of the coin. So this just makes the conversation more complex. So I'm just trying to dumb it down, I guess. It's a case of my Monday morning. Keep it short, Zach.
To answer that question, in the event that, Mr. James, in the event the commercial short-term rental license was ever revoked, rescinded, or abandoned, this would go, to any other type of permitted commercial use in there and could potentially turn into an office. Instead of looking at it as a hotel, this thing with a slight modification, I know there's a couple architects on this board, modifications of old houses into stores, modifications of old houses into offices, the mixing and matching of that corner store establishment. This is a perfect example of the end is not near if the commercial short-term rental ever gets revoked. There's a plethora of other very easy to infill commercial uses into this building.
And that's where my conundrum has been, is that I'm looking at 4 Houston townhouses on a site and with a certain, and I can't get my head out of what I'm seeing on the paper, right? And that, just like I would not, if I were, I'm just having a hard time with the seeing the shift in the building and the way it's laid out. But with that said, I mean, yeah, where I work is an old apartment building, right? So actually it's an old Creole townhouse that's been chopped up into apartments. So, I mean, I get that argument, but I'm looking at the standards for the design on the outside of the building. If I weren't looking at the floor plan, there are elements of it to be a commercial building that in the argument here from the city aren't visible. So, I mean, I guess that's the question for me is if are we looking at the plans that are here and the elevations? Are we looking at just the use? I mean, I guess I'm having trouble. You're taking a building that looks to me like a residential building and arguing that you want to follow commercial bulk and use standards. If I'm getting the argument correct, I apologize if I'm wrong. Because you want it to be commercial, but take advantage, but then basically you got 4 residential units. So maybe I've got this all wrong, but I'm looking at the last paragraph of the report and that's how I read the interpretation. So
and I guess I'm a little stuck even before you get to that point, Rami, because what I'm struggling with is what is required in order to operate as a short-term rental and making sure that by making any other changes, would they still meet the base requirements to even operate a short-term rental if it's no longer considered a dwelling unit.
Right.
And that's the piece that I'm trying to.
Yeah, so you're looking at it a completely different way than I am, because I'm just looking at is it commercial, is it residential, and what does it look like? What does that mean for the inside of the building and how it's put together? I'm trying to take out the STR thing, and
right. And it's almost like the plans actually cause us more of the plans is actually what's crippling the determination.
And that may be because, all of the plans tend to look like Greek to me. So it could be the architects in you guys' minds. And that's why I'm not seeing it. I'm not having quite the same confusion that you all are.
Yeah. I'll make it easy for you, Candace. If you look at the 3D model on the front page, you look at 4 garage doors and 4 porches and 4 balconies. So it's a very clear design. It's not, I mean, if this was a ground floor,
I get it.
Retail, apartments above that, it would be, that's what I can't get past. So I
got it.
And that's what I see. That's why it's hard for me to not see 4 residential units.
But here's the other parts of that equation, even muddy the water further. We're dealing with a plan in front of us that technically still isn't compliant with multiple standards. So if the plan is shown, I don't even know if you could get permitted to have the 4 garage doors across the front if it was a 4-unit complex. So that we have that component to it. So how the plan would get modified in order to come into compliance may change the overall perception of how this building would be viewed. So there's that component. So that's why I'm thinking the plan is actually crippling our ability to really look at this seamlessly to understand it. So Rami, you see that part. So yeah, if we were talking about townhomes, he could divide that up into 4 lots and it functions as townhomes. But if it's a multifamily, it can't get permitted. Is that correct, Nick? I'm sitting up here playing Nick for 5 minutes, but just looking at just first glance, it's just the plan is causing more confusion than it's helping the decision.
And I'm trying to, Mr. Smith's point, I'm trying not to operate in a hypothetical. So I understand that, but it goes back to just trying to work this through, at least to its logical conclusion, and completely understanding that some of this starts to get into sort of a hypothetical world, and I'm trying not to do that. But it is definitely making me use all of my brain cells on this Monday afternoon. Thanks a lot, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, way to go.
Well, and I want to say that everything you said is interesting, but like looking at what we're here to the side, which is determining that commercial short-term rentals are subject to the residential zoning guidelines, right? Whatever we said is a precedent for that statement to be true, and that might not apply to other conditions, other project types with other commercial uses.
I'm stumped. Nick and Ashley, just I hate to go all the way back to square one. So I'm gonna try an old trick we did before. What is the actual question at hand?
So I think the actual question at hand is, yes, we're talking about a specific project, but I do agree this does have greater implications for other potential projects coming through that include commercial short-term rentals. So the question is, when we have these sort of projects that have multiple residential dwelling units and one of the units is going to contain a commercial short-term rental, do we consider that structure to be a residential structure, or do we consider that to be a commercial / mixed use structure because it contains those residential dwelling units and a commercial short-term rental? And so the department's position on this is that the commercial short-term rental unit is required to be within a dwelling unit, and the dwelling unit is a residential use. So when you have these situations where it's essentially 4 residential dwelling units, we need to look at that as a residential use. And when we have any sort of conflict between, residential or commercial, we have to go back to what is the most restrictive. And in this case, the residential setbacks are more restrictive than any commercial or mixed use setbacks in the HUMU district. So that's why the department ultimately went with this is a residential structure subject to the residential setbacks.
All right, but when we get into, just real quick, but when we get into the definition of short-term rental a commercial short-term rental versus short-term rental, small or large, both are permitted within this district, correct? All three are permitted within this district.
I believe so. That's correct.
Yeah, this is a MU. This is a MU1 or an MU?
HUMU, I believe.
Wait.
Nick's correct, HUMU.
HUMU. All right, I'm in the wrong district.
But small and large short-term rentals are permitted in the HUMU.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to check on the table. I was in the wrong section. So in either scenario, all three are allowed. It's just the difference of application of what.
Setbacks and bulk and yard.
Correct.
Mr.
And
James,
if it was a large, so let me ask this question real quick. If it was a short-term rental, large or small, that only allows for a certain percentage of units, or can all 4 units be used as STRs?
It requires a homestead exemption, which is the primary difference. Someone within the dwelling unit complex would have to have a homestead exemption. And then from there, it would be possible to get more than one short-term rental in the development, which is all that commercial will allow because there's a 25% cap. So it is certainly a complicated issue. Again, we also don't disagree that this could really benefit from some more clarifying CZO legislation and drafting. But we have to work with what's in front of us. And we are bound by the requirement that we implement the most restrictive interpretation.
And I'm looking at the definition and how it's broken down, and it's, short-term rental and then has a bunch of stuff, and then residential and commercial seem to be about how they're used or not, like who's paying for it or how it, it's a residential homeowner that's renting out their apartment versus a business that's renting out. Does that make sense? Like, is that how it's broken down? So it's almost like, it's owner operator or owner of the dwelling unit renting out their other unit or whatever versus a Saunders or, somebody.
Right. The primary distinction is the homestead exemption requirement.
Yeah.
Because
is a way to ensure that it is someone who lives on site and has a vested interest in being on site and having, neighbors in their property. That was the policy consideration behind that versus someone who operates these as a business and may not be on site to immediately address quality of life issues.
But my point is that the primary definition is it's a dwelling unit in a building. And so how do you define what that building's kind of overlay, grand zoning is, in that site? So that you're taking the last definition and saying, well, now my building's commercial. And that's where I think I'm struggling with this, that the building, what I'm seeing in the plans and how I'm seeing it designed and what all the setbacks are, it's like, I want it to be commercial, but I'm filling it up with residential uses. And it doesn't quite, it doesn't look like a multifamily building to me. It doesn't look like a, townhouse doesn't really work. So, yeah. Maybe put commercial on the ground floor and make an apartment building. Sort of.
Yeah, that was going to be a point. I think
it looks residential.
Yeah, well, it looks, it's aesthetics, so I don't think that's a reasoning to respond. The truth is that again, the design, that's why designers can design, right? That's the word design. Like they have the ability to make up a design that allows them to, best use the properties. And again, to run to your question, if we would have had clear C in the ground floor a space, right, that feels that is commercial, right? Like our perception of what commercial spaces are typically understand to be, then you clearly will see, well, there it is, right? And you see the apartments on top, whether you have straight stairs that shoot up to those units or whatever, the design certainly is affecting our decision making. But again, what I'm seeing is that the truth is that we're just here to gauge whether or not what is the way we are going to address this now into the future as we open as it relates. How are we going to judge these things as commercial short-term rentals in the future? And and that's fine. This is maybe the first time. I don't know. I mean, for 2 years in the board, I think this is the first time because it's quite new for everybody as well. So the city and the staff also are making their best judgment at it. I mean, I just feel, well, my position, if to say something, is that, you know, this is a vertical commercial space, and in no way, I mean, the way I'm reading it, and whether that is going to be true in the future or true in the past, I don't know. But today, if that's what is being proposed and is acceptable by the zoning, our role is to say that is allowable. And so the question is that, so are we allowing this space to be assumed to be a unit that happens to be a vertical element into a more, you know, ordained sort of, you know, like set up buildings? And you know, I kind of think about, because we do this a lot about commercial uses in other places. It's like, you know, when we have variances for other zoning districts about like, what is a commercial use of 5,000 square feet versus 10,000 square feet, right? We can have multiple 5,000. It's just, you know, more complicated than it is, I think. But so my point being is that I feel that this is in some way just a different way to see the same problem. But it certainly sounds to me that if that's the intended use, we should, you know, trust the people who's trying to do this. I mean, at my first glance, you know, outside all the complexities that we're bringing to the table.
Yeah, Jose, I think I guess I mean, I'm usually pretty open to this stuff, but this one feels backwards in my head, that the commercial is following it's at the end, and that this is really a dwelling unit that has a operator that is not the homeowner. And to then say that the whole building's zoning requirements are commercial because of one unit that is residential by nature, or not a dwelling unit. So the design of that unit, I mean, it'd be easier if it was just an empty, you know, I guess I can't separate from looking at the plans. If I didn't have the plans in front of me, I would be, you know, be a lot easier. And so I actually don't have a problem. I guess what I'm arguing is that I understand the argument that you should be allowed to have a commercial short-term rental if the building is designed to be a commercial structure. And maybe am I reading that wrong? If it's a multifamily building and it has commercial, if it's going to be considered a commercial building, it should have commercial characteristics. And I think, am I reading that wrong, Nick? That is what your argument is here, that it should meet all the requirements of a commercial building, that if that's what the argument is here. I mean, I'm still confused because I feel like the tail is wagging the dog here, that it's like the commercial thing at the end of the dwelling unit thing is driving the design of the whole building.
Yeah, and I think if these were to be considered a commercial use, then yes, it would have to meet all the commercial design guideline considerations. So if ultimately that is what the board decides, then yes, it would have to meet every commercial design guideline. But once again, the department's position is, and I think, Rami, you are kind of alluding to this, is this has to be a residential dwelling unit first before you can even have a commercial short-term rental use in there. So it has to be designed, it has to have a kitchen, it has to have, you know, all the functions of a residential dwelling unit to even be allowed to have the commercial short-term rental use in it. And it's not a question of whether or not a commercial short-term rental use is allowed here. It's a question of what setbacks should be applied to this structure. Would we apply commercial setbacks to this structure, or are we going to apply the residential setbacks?
And I guess the question is, can a commercial unit be a dwelling unit?
Yes. Essentially, it really boils down to how you lay out inside the plan within the building's envelope. So case in point with residential uses, traditionally windows have to still be 10 feet away or some other distance away from adjoining properties, but you could easily lay out a unit where the windows are strictly on the front and the back of the building, which allows for the open air requirements and for the windows to open. inherently still falling. I mean, that's no different from if we converted a building in a warehouse district to residential, right? So
Right, but usually in those scenarios, there's other things that you'd have to do to that building to make it compliant as a residential unit. So that's why I'm trying to figure out, the same thing that Rami was saying, I guess we're working at it from different starting points, because I'm trying to get to how, if the first question is a dwelling unit, whether or not you take away the residential word, to the applicant is saying that residential is not included in that phrase. It only says dwelling unit, but the department is saying dwelling unit is a residential by nature. So I'm trying to figure out, how do you get from commercial back to residential if that's the underlying first step in order to be a short-term rental?
Well, hence why I brought up that question earlier about hotel. Okay, so coming back to that conversation, and Ms. Becknell did reference that even with hotels, those are technically dwelling units.
Well, not necessarily, because it requires everything to be an independent residential or independent unit. That's not always the case for a hotel. A hotel doesn't always have living, eating, restroom, all of those components. So it's not always a dwelling unit.
That's correct. Like a traditional hotel is not a dwelling unit. It's just a bedroom.
All right. Well, when I asked that question earlier, I felt like I got a different response. So
because she mentioned that specific, the kitchen is what I remember. So I remember her saying it had to include all of the components to be an independent occupied unit.
So an apartment hotel where there were kitchens could likely function both ways, but not all hotels include kitchens. It's relatively rare.
Not all, but they could.
They could. It is possible to.
Correct. I mean, any extended stay hotel has that internal function of some level of a kitchen. It may not have a stove, but it has some.
So we have definitions about what a kitchen is too.
I was just about to say, it does have to have a stove.
It has to have permanent cooking facilities, in our opinion.
Correct. Yeah, this thing. So Rami, coming back to your point earlier about what comes first, residential or commercial? I mean, again, I don't know, man, this plan really messes it up. And I wish we weren't looking at the floor plan. I almost wish it was just a question of clarification of how use standards apply.
And I guess maybe I looked at it that I wasn't as focused on the floor plan. So that's why I'm not tied as much to the floor plan. I'm trying to get out of, how do you get out of a dwelling unit? And that's the part that I'm stuck on, is that I don't see how you get from that when the standards indicate that a commercial short-term rental is tied to a dwelling unit.
That is a unique situation in the zoning code. There aren't other commercial units that are tied to a dwelling unit. It's only one.
Because if it's also a commercial unit, then the ventilation requirements for a stove would change. Is that correct from the building code standpoint?
I'm hesitant to speak to the building code because it is certainly not my area of expertise.
Again, it's a plan that while we're talking about it in principle, what we have shown in front, and I get it. I agree with the chairwoman, just trying to come back to just what's pure. That's why I said question earlier. What is the actual question? Because there's too much information has been provided that only just muddies the water as opposed to just clear question in front of it. So, I mean, again, if you're looking at just what's in the use standards table under commercial uses, is where it shows commercial STR. It's not shown under residential table. Yeah, and I understand that there's a conversation of how legislation is going to be amended at some point soon. I know that's been flirting in the water, but again, we're just stuck with what's the question before us at hand without having any clarity around what's going to be forthcoming through council.
Yeah, and the ramifications of what we're saying, that all the conditions that we will have, I mean, again, of short-term rentals, other type of short-term rentals as a commercial use in other designs. I mean, I'm just even hesitant to you know, to say that this is actually something that because this one case that this will create a precedent that I'm just not comfortable.
Yeah.
Agreeing to.
Because I tend to, I definitely think about that sometimes to the precedent part, Jose, because I'm trying to think of, and maybe it's the lawyer in me, that I'm trying to think of worst case scenarios, like what happens if you've created this precedent, what have we not thought of that would somehow now get lumped into this? And I completely understand, Mr. Smith, to your point of not wanting to work through hypotheticals, but we, as the board, sometimes have to consider what our decisions may ultimately lead to. So I'm trying to think a little bit of that perspective, and just trying to weigh all of that together in thinking through this one.
Commissioner Forrest, for that hypothetical, if you could imagine a hypothetical where the decision is made today saying, yes, commercial short-term rentals are in fact commercial uses because the table plainly says that. The hypothetical being that this property owner goes back, does a redesign to be completely compliant with the rest of the standards, which again, were not asked as part of this appeal. But that hypothetical, I think, is the most important one to the hypothetical, which is really what the future of this situation would be, a redesign to be completely compliant with the standards and the rest of the HUMU building design standards. If that hypothetical is met, I believe it's going to handle a bunch of those things, because the biggest thing for most of the commissioners has been what this thing looks like. And we completely understand that there's a future. Again, today's decision is not a granting of a permit for this thing to be built. There are some redesigns that have to be done. To Commissioner Alvarez's point, you know, this is really a conversation about our commercial short-term rentals, commercial uses. And that's the point that's been applied for. That's what we made the request for. I get there's a lot of things in there, but you know, that I always want to try and bring back that, because it does go down all the rapids. I would be doing the same thing.
Yeah, and I guess to me, the commercial standards are what I am trying to understand, whether or not that meeting those standards will then take away the dwelling perspective of the requirement for a short-term rental. And that's what I'm trying to think through, because it feels like it does.
The tying the two uses together does make it much more complex.
If that was the case, you know, to Commissioner Alvarez's point, then design, you know, architectural design is completely, you know, changes the permitted use table. And I think that conflict right there is the non kind of the more ludicrous of the outcomes. You know, there's a lot of potential ways to make a short-term rental look different. There are people that can make things look like a whole bunch of different things, as any architect hopefully can do. And again, there's offices that look like houses because they used to be houses. There's nothing that stops me right now, as long as I meet the transparency and the height requirement. The transparency of the front facade and the height requirement, that is essentially the only design standards that really come into play here. That, with the tweak and a redesign, I believe we can do. So that's why I bring it back to you know, Commissioner Alvarez's point of the question is, can we agree that commercial short-term rentals are commercial uses as laid out in the table for HUMU, as well as the rest of the zoning, ordinance.
So I'm gonna come back to the point I made earlier, just with the garage doors themselves and to the transparency requirement. He's still not going to be able to get permitted for those garage doors as they're currently shown, even if it's a commercial use. So again, the entire first floor plan is going to change.
That's why the hypothetical is important to know that the future of this is a redesign of the aesthetic to be compliant with the other parts. But as you guys know, there's no reason.
And I'm sorry to cut you off, Mr. Smith. So I guess what I'm confused with then is that if a redesign is already anticipated, what is the harm of the applicant staying in the dwelling unit side of things? Like, why is that a problem if you're already contemplating redesign?
So right now, the question that we wanted to ask was this one. There's potential hypotheticals again that we spend time and the client's money to redesign this thing again, where the root question about whether a commercial short-term rental is in fact a commercial use has not been answered. That is critical because it would potentially mean that we have to abandon what we know because we're reading the table as a permitted use. Imagine if we were to redesign this in a certain way to meet all the design standards, which everybody can agree on would apply to commercial uses, but the same question has still not been answered, which is a commercial short-term rental a commercial use? Then we would have spent weeks and a lot of the client's money redesigning a thing. So we can't move forward until we can all agree that a commercial short-term rental is a commercial use because it's clearly black and white at the table. That's
I don't think that we're arguing that the table says that it's a different type of use. I think we're arguing that certain residential standards are more applicable to this particular commercial use because it is tied by definition to a dwelling unit.
And that's what I'm trying to understand. What of the residential requirements are problematic to meet if you stay as a residential dwelling unit? I'm not understanding what happens different. If you're saying that there's really no difference, what is different with your request? What is it that you're seeking to be able to modify with your request?
So
in terms of your design.
Yeah, the biggest question would be, again, it's all in the hypothetical for the future redesign, but it's the moniker that this thing is not a mixed use building. So the bulk and area use tables have basically said that you can't, for townhouses or for residential alone, that you can't have the same number of units and that the setbacks are different. So without this being determined whether this is in fact a mixed use building because it contains a commercial use, it completely changes whether or not this thing is what the setbacks are. So the use table,
if it's mixed use and you take away short-term rental, are you able to accomplish the same goal where if it's mixed use residential and commercial and you're not given the short-term rental option, are you achieving this? I'm trying to think through this, and I'm just trying to understand what is negatively impacting the applicant by this requirement, and I'm not hearing it yet. We can maybe look at this in different ways and see this different ways, but I'm not seeing where there's a harm to the applicant, and that's what I'm trying to figure out.
So to answer that question right now, if this is looked at as mixed use, because it is a mixed use with the commercial short-term rental, the setbacks, the side yard setbacks, the rear yard setbacks are, as far as I understand and appreciate it, the way in which this building is situated on the lot would be able to remain as designed. That's part one. Part two is if we were to take out the commercial short-term rental and put an office in there, this thing, other than those standard redesigns, which we all agree have to be done in the future.
Or even mixed use with residential. I mean, just not short-term rentals, just mixed use, some other type.
The harm there would be an applicant is, in this case, the owner is trying to get permitted something that's clearly identified as a permitted use. So the harm would be a citizen, a property owner, not being able to develop a property in line with the CCO, the use table. That would be the harm. The hypothetical of being told no on this particular question is the rights of the property owner not being allowed to develop something that has a P next to it on the use table.
Nick, can I ask a clarifying question to all this? I keep asking this, and maybe I'm try one more time. If this building were designed to meet all of the commercial kind of the shape of the building, what it looks like on the outside in terms of the visibility stuff, how it's entered, the stuff Todd brought up about the driveways and all that stuff. If it actually met all that, and one of the uses in the building was an STR, commercial STR, and we weren't actually looking at the floor plan. You guys just, you said the building meets all of the requirements, right? As Zach is implying here that he's going to redesign it to make it fit. Would this even be before us? Because I think what I'm looking at is a building that looks like 4 townhouses in Houston, and there's nothing in it that implies that there's commercial use in it. And so, but then the STR thing gets all confused because that's kind of a dwelling thing and all that. But if we just go back to if we accept the argument that it's a commercial building, and then it's going to follow commercial standards because it's got a commercial STR. The building would look, the design would be different. Am I correct? I mean, would this even be before us if the building met that the underlying zoning things as Zach is arguing?
In my position, Commissioner, it would not need it.
Sorry, that was for Nick.
No problem.
So even if changes were made to make the building look more commercial, there's still the issue of the building would contain 4 dwelling units in it. And those would be, one would be a commercial short-term rental, but that wouldn't necessarily, our position is that doesn't make it mixed use because they're 4 dwelling units, that makes it residential. And so one question that Mr. Smith keeps bringing up is saying that we're denying them a commercial short-term rental in this district. No, we're not. They still have the right to have one commercial short-term rental unit in one of these 4 units because it is a permitted use in the district. It's just what setbacks does the structure need to be? And the department's position is that it needs to have those residential setbacks.
Okay, so one more framing of that. If the 4 units, let's say unit 1 on the corner was labeled office for the purpose of this application, and then it gets built and a year later they want to convert it into an STR, would that be allowed?
If it was initially built as an office with the same setbacks and then they tried to convert it to a residential unit for an STR, that would then trigger, I think, setback variances for the rear yard setback, side yard setback, and any other deficiencies there, because you're going from something that's compliant as mixed use to something that's non-compliant with the residential setback.
We'd also, any kind of conversion, anytime we say the word convert, we have to consider that there may be nonconformities that would have to be taken into account. It's not as straightforward as a new construction where we're looking at plans on a blank slate.
So the only way that would work is if the structure met the underlying residential requirements, where there wouldn't be any variances that could be triggered. Because and I guess what I'm asking is, what I'm hearing is that the only distinction is the setbacks, that there's a residential setback requirement versus the commercial setback requirement. So the only thing that's different is the setbacks. And that's the question I was trying to get to in the beginning, is what is actually different between what the applicant is asking for and what's currently allowed. So the difference is the setbacks. In terms of everything else, it's the same.
Maybe off-street parking?
We've said in this decision that this is about the setbacks and Vulcan Yard, I believe, but Nick can correct me if I'm misstating that, because this is one that was rendered while I was on leave.
Yes, I believe setbacks is the major issue here.
So in terms of some of the questions that Commissioner Diaz is bringing up, I don't feel like they even are, I mean, like the design pieces aren't really an issue if it's strictly just about the setbacks. Is that accurate?
Because and I'm gonna add, I thought also usually there's the open space requirements when we're dealing with dwellings. Off-street parking requirements are a little different between commercial versus residential, correct? Nick?
Yes, so those would have different requirements based on the plan submitted. It looks like these would comply with the parking requirements.
So all of those, and I'm sorry for sounding repetitive, but I'm trying to get to, if those are met, then that's not really an issue. So then it goes back to the question relates to the setbacks and the bulk requirements.
So Chairwoman,
I think what Nick is saying is that he's met those requirements either way.
I don't think so. So again, I'm gonna come back to the parking comment I made. the number of curb cuts would not be allowed as is currently shown. So how it's provided and planned, a number of stalls provided may be compliant, but how it's reviewed and approved with Public Works and Safety and Permits may not be acceptable. So the plan changes substantially at the ground plane. So again, yes, it may meet it in principle within the box, but everything else around the box does not come into compliance. So it does change the plan, and it does change how the development of the site.
I guess that was my point, is that I can't look at it in abstract because I keep seeing those other things. So if I were to look at it in abstract and just say, you know, let's not take this site and the design, what are the elements of it that would change if it went from being, you know, an office use to a dwelling unit? Because you would look at the building differently if it was 3 apartments and an office. And then that would trigger a different design. You wouldn't have, So I mean, I guess I'm, struggling here, because I totally understand that the use, list here puts it in commercial, but there's so many things associated with dwelling unit requirements to make it meet the code. But I understand also Zach's underlying argument, so I'm just completely befuddled here.
But to your point, yes, if one of these 4 spaces would say office all the way throughout, it had a kitchenette, which is allowed in commercial, in office space, or even, in some office spaces, you were allowed a kitchen, depends on, you got a DA.
Commercial ventilation.
Yeah. Then that would be absolutely allowed. If they choose to turn that into a residential or short-term rental after the fact, then they will have to go through that process that Ashley had been talking about. And that will be another battle and another time. But again, I think it's very simple. Is to follow that chart.
Yeah.
And that's our responsibility, I think, to interpret that.
Correct. I agree with Commissioner Alvarez. I don't like the outcome of it, but
I guess I'm still, and maybe it's just I'm not seeing it the same way, and I don't see it that. I guess what I'm struggling with is that all of those scenarios don't have an initial requirement of a dwelling unit in order to get to step B. And I guess for me, that's what I'm not able to get past. And so I'm not able to think past the fact that you would have to me, it's not a matter of a commercial meeting the standards of otherwise a dwelling unit. It's a dwelling unit that just may happen to look commercial, but it has to be a dwelling unit first. I don't see where it can be a commercial first.
Because of how the use table is set up. So if myself or Commissioner Alvarez, or I don't want to speak for you guys, but I guess in terms of how we would develop a plan, working with a client, and we understood what was the intended use at the end of the day, we would say, okay, if it's an office use or if it's a multifamily use, we go back to the use table and then see, okay, where does it fall? So if it falls under residential, we would see a series of checkboxes. If we see that initial use falls under commercial, we would then follow a secondary set of checkboxes and then develop.
But I don't think the initial use is commercial. I still feel like the initial use, because it says that it has to be a residential, it has to be a dwelling unit. I'm not seeing it the same way.
So if you look at the CZO and the CZO use table, the CZO use table, it falls under commercial, not residential.
Right, but it requires that it be a dwelling unit to get to that use.
I think our argument is that a definition is the primary step. We can't determine where something falls in a use table until we know what kind of use it is. The definition here requires it to be a dwelling unit. And then when we move to the use table, we've got the commercial. So I think that's kind of what Ms. Forrest is getting at as well. It's how we looked at it, which is for us to determine whether something's a bar or an office or a restaurant, we have to look at Chapter 26, look at the definition of those uses and determine which is the most appropriate use. And then we look to the use table to see if that use is residential, commercial, industrial. Here, it's immediately complicated by the definitional tie to the dwelling unit.
Yep.
Right, and that's
it automatically contemplates two things at the same time. And when that's the case, there's the requirement to go with the most restrictive, which is a residential unit.
And no other commercial use has that tie.
Correct. And
Right.
that's how I'm walking through it.
Right. And that's why I keep going back to, if it's 4 dwelling units, that's one thing. If it's a commercial space and 3 dwelling units, that's different, right? It's a different design. But because for it to be a commercial STR, it needs to be a dwelling unit. So you're looking at it. And so this is where I understand it both ways. But it wouldn't be a dwelling unit. Like if you were to develop, as I said, if you develop it as an office, then it would have a different design standard than if it was a dwelling unit. So it'd be a lot easier if you just had commercial with 4 units on top, and then one of those units becomes an STR. Then you could make it meet all the commercial zoning.
If you guys had 10 seconds for me.
5.
I know there's a spot that's called out here. I remind everybody that dwelling unit is the term used. And while dwelling does get back to residential, it talks about a dwelling, a structure or portion of structure designed and used exclusively for permanent residential purposes. Again, this is that kind of circular logic where when we determine that a commercial short-term rental is commercial, it tells us that we're clearly not permanent residential because we've looked at it in the use table. The second part, Mr. James had started on this earlier, is when we get into the definitions of commercial short-term rental, they're very much different and they're meant to be in that commercial nature, much closer to a hotel. If we were to go back and read, and I wish that folks that wrote the CZO in 2019 were here to weigh in, to really talk about the intent that the council clearly had. It's in all of their commentary, it's in all of those public hearings. So we get caught up sometimes in looking at one word, whereas the word that's used again and again and again is dwelling unit, not in fact dwelling. And the fact that they call out permanent residential purposes, where we clearly have a use that the city council through the CZO has identified as a commercial use.
Yeah, but it's also identified as a temporary, as in short term. So I'm like, you can't pick apart one part and not pick apart the whole thing.
No,
I feel like, I understand, but I feel like if you're gonna walk that line, you have to walk it all the way through. So yes, it's commercial, but the second part of that is short term. And so even in your definition, when you defined the dwelling unit, it included the term residential. And so residential, in which you just read, you said a permanent residential use.
That's the term.
But I don't want to get into a back and forth on semantics. I feel like I don't know what the end result is going to be, but clearly everybody is looking at this in slightly different ways. And I still state that I am not, and that I'm only one commissioner. I cannot separate the dwelling unit side and the commercial short-term rental side. You have to look at them both together, in my opinion. I don't see a way to break that apart.
I have to admit, I might have gotten swayed a little bit there with the dwelling unit distinction, but I still question, and there is a semantic thing there about permanent, and maybe it's a question for Ashley or Nick. When you read dwelling unit, it's a room or group of rooms providing complete independent living facilities, including permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, or cooking, or sanitation. It doesn't say permanent. I mean, I read it as not like you have to be there all the time. It's the functions within it are permanent. Like the rooms and the kitchens and things are permanent functions in the building. Am I reading that correctly? Like, so short term isn't really in that, or am I wrong?
Short term is strictly about the duration of stay. That's
right. The semantics of dwelling unit are permanent provision for these functions in a room, in a building. It doesn't say single family, multi-family, because I have to admit, I was reading dwelling, and the definition of dwelling. Man.
It's a key term. It's a key term, but it is critical. It is critical to every definition throughout. They're very similar, but they're very different because of the commercial moniker.
So either some very clever people wrote this stuff, or you know, so that you could get these holes in there, or it wasn't written well at all. It's killing me. Because I'm not clever enough to read past one thing to another.
Yeah, and as someone who is involved in some of these drafting of these things, like, yeah, I don't think the intent here was ever to provide this sort of loophole in to allow for additional or a larger kind of building envelope for these types of projects. And I know in kind of the first round of developing these regulations, you know, we tried to look out for certain loopholes of, oh, I'm doing a short-term rental, therefore it's not subject to the density requirements. And so we tried to be explicit about that. I think certainly, yeah, there are kind of holes in the regulations, and the department is trying to be as consistent as possible and account for all the different situations, because most people aren't coming in with a proposed plan saying, yes, I'm doing this right off the bat. I'm doing a commercial short-term rental and one of the 4 units here. Mostly we get, you know, an existing building and somebody's coming in for a single license. And so we don't want to have to treat those people differently and now apply commercial standards, because we are now saying a commercial short-term rental is a commercial use, and now you need to get a variance for transparency or you know, ground floor building height requirement, because now you're trying to get a certain license type within within a residential dwelling. So to get back to kind of your point, yeah, these regulations are very complicated, and I don't think any of these necessarily ambiguous sections were intentional. It was just kind of the unfortunate nature of kind of how these regulations come about. And getting back to the term commercial, I know commercial was initially in there to differentiate something in a commercial zoning district as opposed to a residential zoning district, and not necessarily that the use was more commercial because it, you know, still had to be within that dwelling unit.
Well, Nick, apologies for casting aspersions on the writers of this. It's actually the other way around. People are finding clever ways to get in there and drive it apart.
Yeah, I would venture, I'm sure this specific scenario was probably not contemplated. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here trying to sort it out now.
Yes, I think that's a very good
diplomatic way to say it.
It was cutting edge legislation, and when you're on the cutting edge, you're always having to learn as you go and build the plane as you fly a bit.
For what it's worth, remember that it was intentionally moved from the residential section to the commercial section of the use table.
So this is when case studies can become your friend.
Yeah, and I believe when it was moved from residential to commercial, that was to be able to apply the parking exemptions and not necessarily to apply different setback requirements.
That's why I brought up the question about the parking scenario. So are we stuck at 0 again, or are we at a position somebody's going to introduce a motion?
Are there any other questions from commissioners? Is there a motion that someone would venture to propose?
I was just gonna say not it on this one. But, you know, I think I'm just gonna say, you know, however this goes, I'm really reacting to, I apologize, I'm really reacting to the design of it and the sort of how it's going to address the street. I know we're not supposed to do that, but given the commercial argument and all that, like, I would love it if this was actually a commercial building with, apartments above. Like, that would be a home run. Make this a lot easier.
Madam Chair, if a motion's in order,
Yes, proceed.
I'll be the brave one, and you can like shut me down.
Proceed.
In regard to docket BCA 008-22, I, Jose Alvarez, move to grant appeal and overturn the decision of the Director of Safety and Permits, finding that there's some error in the interpretation of the comprehensive ordinance as per the discussions have had today.
And I, Ty James, second that.
Thank you. With regards to BZA docket 008-22, it's been moved by Commissioner Alvarez, second by Commissioner James, to overturn the decision of the Department of Safety and Permits, finding that there was an error in that decision. Roll call vote, Ty James,
Yes.
Tamara Eggins,
Yes.
Jose Alvarez,
Yes.
Ramiro Diaz,
Oh, yes.
Alfonso Gonzalez,
Yay.
Matthew Rufo,
Yes.
and Candace Forrest, no. 6 yeas, 1 nay, the motion carries.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sorry. I believe that's the last item.
Yes. Do you have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
It has been graciously moved by Commissioner James, second by Commissioner Gonzalez to adjourn. Roll call vote, Ty James,
Yes.
Tamara Eggins,
Yes.
Jose Alvarez,
Yes.
Ramiro Diaz,
Yes.
Alfonso Gonzalez,
Yay.
Matthew Rufo,
Yes.
and Candace Forrest, yes. 7 yeas, no nays, the motion carries and the meeting is adjourned. Long day.
Thank you, guys.
Y'all have a good Mardi Gras at least.
Happy
Yes.
Valentine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's it.
Oh, I forgot about
That's
that.
it. Oh, that
Damn
too.
it.
Bye, everybody.
Have
Have
a
a
week.
good day.